Nobody had been there for months. Sully had been secretly going off base and faking the numbers. He never stepped foot in those weather shacks.
Nobody noticed the guy kept disappearing? Right. Government precision.
When Charles returned to the Jeep, he confirmed that Sully had been lying about the numbers. Sullivan didn't care. He said he'd give Charles a tour and never wanted to go to the ranges again. Pretty soon, Charles would understand why. Over the next few months, Charles spent more time on the ranges at Indian Springs than anyone else. Against advice, he was usually out there alone, but he enjoyed it. It was peaceful, and he never saw Range 4 Harry. One day, Charles was out on the range, and it was especially hot. In the desert, the ground could reach 120 or 130 degrees, and today it felt even hotter than that. Charles spent most of the day in the weather shack. He didn't have air conditioning, but he had an old fan, and that was good enough. Besides, the sun was setting, and soon it would go from blistering hot to freezing cold. That was life in the desert. Feet up on the desk, Charles daydreamed as he gazed into the desert, watching the sky go from deep blue to orange to red. There was no sound except the songs of meadowlarks. Charles wondered to himself if meadowlarks were common in the desert. He didn't think so, but whatever birds they were, he enjoyed the sound. Then he saw something dart between the sagebrush. Charles blinked. There it was again. He assumed it was a large rabbit or a coyote, but it was covered in brilliant white fur. The more he focused, the more he realized it was moving erratically through the maze of sagebrush like it was in distress. Charles jumped out of his chair and threw open the door of the shack. Then he saw it. It wasn't a rabbit or a coyote. It was a child.
Describe them. I know we have an animated picture of what they look like on the website. Kind of describe the tall whites for us.
Well, the one that Paula has on her website is a very good rendition of a particular tall white lady. Each one of them were individuals, like the people say in New York City, but they were generally, throughout much of their adult life, they were about the same height as me, 5'11", 6 feet. Mm-hmm. They were very thin and frail. They had skin as white as a piece of paper. What I do know about them is that they come from a planet that's somewhat hotter than the Earth and somewhat larger than the Earth, and they naturally live underground.
The girl was barely 3 feet tall, and her skin was chalk white. She wore a silver jumpsuit and boots, and her hair was brilliant white blonde. Behind her bright blue eyes, she looked as terrified as Charles. She was tangled in the brush. He called out to her. He said there's no reason to be afraid. He wasn't going to hurt her. He cleared the sagebrush around her so she could easily get out, but he made himself clear that he wouldn't touch her. On a nearby fence post, he left a canteen of water. He said if she was lost, he would help her. All she had to do was ask. Charles turned back toward the shack. That's when he heard something crashing through the brush. It was big, and it was moving fast, and it was getting closer. Charles turned and saw something, a man, a very tall man. He had the same features as the little girl, pale skin, white hair, silver suit, and he was charging right at Charles. The sounds of the meadowlarks now became screeches. The peaceful desert had become chaos. Charles jumped back in the weather shack and barricaded the door. Did he just see Range 4 Harry? Charles wasn't sure, but he was sure that these people weren't human. Charles waited for what felt like hours. It was the middle of the night, and the desert was pitch black. The songbirds and the screeching had finally stopped. The only sound was a gentle rustling of wind through the brush. Charles gathered his nerves and left the shack. He checked his canteen. It was half empty. In the sand, he saw 3 sets of footprints, a child and 2 adults. Someone was there. Charles had seen enough. He scrambled to his Jeep, fired up the engine, and tore down the dirt road heading back to base. No more than a few minutes passed when Charles got another shock. Standing in the brush next to the road was an extremely tall woman, well over 6 feet tall. And like the child and the other entity, she had skin as white as chalk. Her hair was shimmering silver. She seemed to glow in the dark. Charles felt panic welling up when a feeling of calm suddenly washed over him. As he passed the tall woman, he could hear her in his mind. Telepathically, she thanked him for helping her daughter. Again, Charles felt his fear rising, but once again, there was calm. The woman, if that's what she was radiating peaceful energy and gratitude. Charles felt like he couldn't be afraid even if he tried. Charles hit the gas but checked his mirrors. After a few minutes, the woman disappeared, and with her went the feeling of peace and calm. Charles stopped his Jeep, stumbled out, and threw up. He was shaking and out of breath. Once he had his wind back, he vomited again. He didn't realize it then, but Charles had won the trust of one of the tall whites. At least that's what the US government called them. The tall whites were not from Earth. The truth was, Charles wasn't sent to the ranges at Indian Springs by his commanding officers, nor was he recommended for the job by his friend Dwight. Charles was specially chosen by a committee of high-ranking generals, members of the government, and leaders of the tall whites. Throughout his time at Nellis, Charles was never told the full truth about his work. He was never given any classified briefings or documentation. He was never read into any black ops or secret government programs. Charles was just a weather observer. But the truth was, he was the one being observed. Late one night in 1896, Colonel H.G. Shaw was traveling in horse and buggy near Lodi, California. Suddenly, the horse became frightened and stopped. In the middle of the road were 3 7-foot-tall beings. The colonel described their skin as so white it looked like polished ivory.
Looking up, we beheld 3 strange beings. They resembled humans in many respects, but still, they were not like anything I had ever seen. They were nearly or quite 7 feet high and very slender. They were possessed of a strange and indescribable beauty.
Colonel Shaw said they didn't speak, but they made warbling sounds like birds. You can actually find this whole story online. It made the front page of the Stockton Evening Mail on November 25th, 1896. This is the first modern report of the tall white aliens, but their story on Earth goes back millennia. Paul Hellyer, the Canadian Defense Minister, was one of the first high-ranking government officials to acknowledge the alien presence. He became interested after a squadron of UFOs was mistaken to be Soviet aircraft.
The investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years.
You're probably familiar with a few of these species. There are a few variations of the greys, which are described as being under 4 feet tall with large heads and large black eyes. There's a species called the Nordics, which are very human-like. There are the tall whites and a few others.
Other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites.
For years, it was rumored that at least one, or perhaps more than one, race of aliens made a deal with the United States government in early 1954. The defense minister agrees.
There are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government.
Nobody knows the specifics of the arrangement.
Yeah, the shadow government knows.
Well, yeah, they do, but the public doesn't. The best guess is that the US would allow the aliens to build facilities on Earth without disruption. The US would also allow aliens to abduct American citizens as long as they provided the government with the list of abductees. In exchange, the United States would have access to alien technology. The US wanted anti-gravity and propulsion technology. The aliens would not give them this. They felt that humans were too violent and dangerous to be let out of our cage, which is this planet. However, the US did receive help with other technology, the first of which was titanium. Now, titanium was discovered in 1791, but it wasn't until the 1950s that titanium began to be used for military aviation, specifically in high-performance jets, starting with the F-100 Super Sabres and Lockheed A-12s. The Super Sabre, by the way, is the first jet to break the sound barrier. If you think this craft looks like a stealth bomber, that's not by accident. The US Air Force used a lot of alien technology to build stealth aircraft. Transistors are said to be alien tech. Transistors allowed the size of electronic devices to be made much smaller and lighter. Laser technology arrived in 1958. That same year, we got fiber optics. And also in 1958, we got the big one, the microchip. The following year, the first integrated circuit was developed. Now, skeptics dismiss these claims as coincidence, and I understand that. But consider this. In 1947, ENIAC was built. This was the first programmable electronic digital computer. It weighed 30 tons. It contained 18,000 vacuum tubes, 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, and 5 million hand-soldered joints. It took up an entire room. ENIAC was decommissioned in 1958 because all of that 30 tons of technology could now be placed on a single chip. That's quite a leap in tech in under 10 years. Satellites, wireless tech, unmanned aerial vehicles, even night vision. All this technology has allegedly been gifted to or reverse engineered by the United States military. Well, certain parts of the military. When Charles Hall gained the trust of the Tall Whites, they showed him some of this technology. They even let him see one of their scout ships. Actually, you've seen them too.
Did they tell you, Charles, where they were from? What star system they might have come up from?
One night I was there with a teacher, and I asked her where she came from, and she smiled and asked me, do I know the names of the stars that the Tall Whites use? And I said, no, I didn't. And she said, so why do you want to know where we come from? However, one night they were standing around me, and I mentioned the star Arcturus, and they all got real nervous.
Charles formed a friendship with the tall white woman whose child he helped find. She went by the name The Teacher. Charles later met Range 4 Harry, who is definitely not a radioactive horse. Range 4 Harry is a high-ranking tall white alien. The Tall Whites travel the stars in large, black, triangular titanium ships. Smaller scout crafts were used to travel within the solar system and around the Earth. These are roughly the size of a bus and can only land on Earth during the full moon. You've seen these scout crafts before. You just know them as the Tic Tac. Charles learned that the scout crafts aren't alien at all. Government contractors like Boeing and Lockheed are the ones building them.
Let's look at this. You know what this is?
Yeah, what's going on, bro? There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
This is an alternative energy and propulsion device. These are things that have existed all the way back to the 60s. But the one that they call the Tic Tac here off the coast of San Diego, the white one, looked very much like this. These have been made by the Lockheed Skunk Works.
Skunk Works is Lockheed Martin's advanced development program. It works on highly classified research as well as exotic aircraft platforms. Because of their deal with the US government, most military personnel believe the Tall Whites use Earth as a truck stop in the middle of the solar system. Earth is rich in raw materials and has these smart little apes who can make somewhat decent vehicles. Through conversations during his 2-year post at Nellis, Charles learned the tall whites oversaw the development of a lot of human tech, but they've never taught us how to reach light speed or how to create the anti-gravity elements of their ships. Now, if you saw last week's episode on free energy and anti-gravity, you remember that anti-gravitic technology was very popular in the early 1950s. The entire aerospace industry was talking about it. Then suddenly, nobody was talking about it. The suspicion is the US military had help in getting this tech to work, so they classified everything. Sometimes the tall whites would take high-ranking military members on tours of the solar system. American generals wanted to expand humanity's operations to other planets, but the tall whites don't think we're ready yet. But Charles does think there's significant trade happening between the US and the tall whites. And when they feel we're ready, the tall whites will finally allow us to inhabit other worlds. So what did they want with someone like Charles? If these beings already had a working relationship with the US government, why was Charles suddenly part of the equation? Well, the answer concerns the other part of the arrangement with the tall whites. Charles learned he was part of an experiment. He was being studied by the tall whites, especially by the teacher. He was fascinating to their species, and the teacher enjoyed spending time with Charles.
Yeah, I think of all the education that I missed, but then my homework was never quite like this.
The teacher taught Charles about her people, and he taught her about humans. Charles spent so much time with her that he became known as the teacher's pet.
Get it bad, get it bad, get it bad. I'm half a teacher.
The tall white.
Get it bad, so bad. I'm half a teacher. Yeah, I'm just trying to liven things up. Go ahead.
The tall whites can speak English, but their natural voices are far higher and lower in range than humans. Their natural speech has been compared to songbirds. While tall whites may appear somewhat human, their abilities are quite different from ours. They possess the power to project powerful emotions into the human consciousness. They can also sense the emotional state of the humans they encounter. Now, even though the tall whites are naturally peaceful, they are always armed. They carry a pen-like object that can stun, damage, or even kill.
Ew, it sounds like a sonic screwdriver.
Kinda, yeah. But Charles was never in danger. He developed a deeply emotional relationship with the tall whites. Not much is known about tall white biology. We know they age slowly. Their first stage of growth lasts until age 400. At this point, they stand between 6 and 7 feet tall. Then they go through a second growth stage. They can grow up to 8 or 9 feet tall, and their eyes turn from blue to pink. The average lifespan of a tall white is about 800 years. Charles was never told where their home planet was. He felt they intentionally kept this a secret. However, when Charles mentioned the star Arcturus, they became uncomfortable. Arcturus is in the constellation of Boötis.
Booties.
Boötis.
It says booties on the teleprompter.
It's pronounced Boötis.
Whatever. The Black Knight satellite is supposed to be from booties.
Boötis. But you're right, that star system has come up before. Now, despite being a more advanced species, tall whites secretly fear humans' intuitive capabilities and ESP. They believe it's just a matter of time before the human race evolves the ability to tap into these powers. They believe we'll develop abilities like telepathy and telekinesis, which is moving objects with thought. They believe every human has the ability to project their consciousness to any place on Earth or beyond.
Remote viewing.
Right. Remote viewing researchers have said that every human has this ability, but only a few talented people have been able to tap into it. Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and Joe McMoneagle were talented remote viewers who worked for military intelligence.
And Pat Price was killed because of it, don't forget.
That's the theory.
Remote viewing links below.
Yeah, we have a lot of episodes on that subject. Well, in total, Charles's experience with the tall whites lasted just 2 years, from 1965 to 1967. In 67, he was deployed to Vietnam and he never saw the tall whites again. He waited almost 40 years to tell his story, but when he finally did, other witnesses came forward who had seen the tall whites. There was enough first-hand accounts that researchers started looking for evidence. The first step was to try to find the secret facilities built by the United States government, and somebody found them. When Charles Hall wanted to release his book Millennial Hospitality in 2002, no publisher would take it on, and that was a mistake. He self-published and the book was a hit. 2 more books followed, and Charles made the typical rounds: UFO conventions, book signings. He did a few TV interviews. He even appeared on Coast to Coast with George Norrie in 2005.
When you work with aliens, I think you're legally required to go on Coast to Coast.
Well, if you want to sell books, that's the show to do. Now, all this attention brought out skeptics who wanted to prove Charles wrong, and it brought out the believers determined to prove him right. And the more people that looked into Charles's story, the more of the story was confirmed to be true. Charles was at Nellis Air Force Base when he said he was. He was a weather observer. He was deployed to Vietnam in '67. All those facts are easily checked.
I want to hear about aliens.
I'm getting to them.
Get there faster.
Some of the best research I found was done by David Hilton. David's website is long gone, but it used to say he was a historian, anthropologist, and researcher. Now, on David's YouTube channel, he has a few videos that seem to confirm that Charles Hall was telling the truth.
I had an interest in the story of Charles Hall and the Tall Whites for a number of years. After reading his book Millennial Hospitality, I was trying to locate the positioning of the weather stations on the bombing and gunnery ranges that he talks about in his book, so that I could better understand the orientation of the various locations.
When researching the story, David came across this photo. At the bottom is Creech Air Force Base in Indian Springs. Remember, even though Charles was stationed at Nellis, his work was done out here at the ranges, in and north of Indian Springs. The photo shows Range 1 in the southeast, Range 3 just north of the base, and Range 4 in the valley.
Oh, that's Harry's hood.
Right, that's where Range 4 Harry got his nickname. But what caught David's attention were the areas marked Scoutcraft Hangar, Scoutcraft Parking, and Resting and Play Area. Charles talks about these locations in his books, so David opened Google Earth to see what was out there. Now, before we zoom in, remember how Charles described the tall white scout crafts. They were about the size of a bus, white and elliptical. In David's video, he shows this image. That looks like the Tic Tac UFO we've all seen by now. But here's the thing. David released his video 11 years ago, long before the Tic Tac was made public. Dr. Stephen Greer and others claim the Tic Tac is a UFO made by Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin. Now, Charles Hall doesn't specifically name Lockheed, but he does say that the scout craft are made by military contractors. Now, let's see what David finds on Google Earth. There is some kind of platform, and near the platform, 3 elliptical white objects, each about the size of a bus.
Tic-tacs!
They certainly look like it. And even if they're not alien scout craft...
They totally are.
Fine, but even if they're not, look at the location. There are no roads or even walking paths leading to this place. And this is exactly where Charles said the craft would be. He also said there was a recreation area here. That platform could be what he's talking about.
Tall white shooting oops?
Could be. So David and people in his audience started scouring Google Earth around the old bombing ranges.
Oh, did they find more alien playgrounds?
Yep, lots more.
One of the first sites listed on the video is just off the end of the runway at Creech Air Force Base. This seems to agree with Charles Hall's story of the aliens coming onto the base from the northwest corner at the end of the runway.
In total, David was able to find 18 separate sites. Other people found a few more. I included some coordinates in the description if you want to check them out for yourself. Now, some of the locations David shows have been scrubbed by Google Earth.
Predictable.
But his video is from 2013, so we can see the locations before they were erased. Most of them are man-made structures, but with no apparent access.
Yeah, because you access them from underground.
That is the theory.
'Cause you access them from underground. Yeah, because you access them from underground. 'Cause 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 you access
But building a tunnel system of this size underneath the bombing range would be an enormous undertaking and extremely expensive. If such a project did indeed occur, you'd expect there to be evidence.
There's evidence, isn't there?
Yup.
Yahtzee!
Not only is there evidence of a major construction project, there's evidence of a black budget cover-up.
Yahtzee.
To build an underground base with miles and miles of tunnels, it's going to be a huge undertaking and wildly expensive. But there's evidence that this project did happen. In January 1951, an article was published in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and the headline is, Indian Springs Project Key to Defense Plans. The project is said to cost $300 million, and that's in 1951. In today's money, that would be $3.6 billion. For comparison, that's about what it cost to build the Freedom Tower in New York. The article said most of the money was to build housing and offices. Look at the base. Do you see billions of dollars worth of construction anywhere? I don't. So where'd the money go? Again, the credit goes to David Hilton for tracking down this information. According to the article, the contract was awarded to the McKee Construction Company in El Paso, Texas. Government contracts are public information. So let's look at the records the McKee Construction Company has for this job. Job number 1267. Description, alternate test site facilities. Location, Las Vegas, Nevada. Contract started on December 23, 1950 and ended May 23, 1951. Total contract cost, $680,000.
Math isn't my strong suit, but
But about $299 of that $300 million is missing.
black budget!
It looks that way, but we don't know for sure. Even the article from 1951 says, quote, the actual details of the program are cloaked in a security blackout. When Las Vegas residents learned about the huge construction project, locals contacted the base looking for work. They were told the military would be using no outside labor for this project. But that $300 million went somewhere. If we don't see that money spent above ground, there's only one other place it could be.
Underground?
Yup.
Holy sh...
Charles Hall and the Tall Whites is considered one of the most credible stories about aliens living with and working with humans here on Earth. But is it true? Well, like many of these stories, we have no physical evidence. We only have the word of the author, in this case, Charles. Do you believe him? Well, most of today's story comes from Charles's books and the documentary Walking with the Tall Whites, both linked below. When Charles tells the story, he sounds sincere. But I've heard many stories from people who sound sincere and turned out to be frauds, and I've outed a few of them on this channel. Now, I don't have evidence that Charles Hall is a fraud, but parts of his story do bother me. First, he released his books, and there are 6 of them now, as science fiction. Only later did he say these things really happened. Now, supporters of the story will mention 3 other witnesses who were with Charles at Nellis Air Force Base. They say his story is true. But those witnesses didn't give their names. They're only known as witnesses A, B, and C. And to complicate matters, on January 13th, 2014, Forbes published an article with a strange headline. Iran says tall white space aliens control America. The article says the United States is ruled by a species of tall white aliens who made a deal with President Eisenhower in 1954. The article also says the tall whites helped bring the Nazis to power in the 1930s. Apparently, this information was discovered by Edward Snowden.
Wait. So this is real?
No. Forbes was covering a story first reported by the Fars news agency, operated by the Iranian government. Forbes said the article is most likely Russian disinformation designed by the FSB, Russian intelligence.
Oh, the American media sure loves to publish Russian disinformation, don't they?
They sure do. Now, I don't believe anything that comes from the Iranian or Russian media.
Oh, but you trust American media?
No.
Yeah, the boy.
But what if they accidentally got something right? That the United States is being controlled by what the article calls a secret regime. I don't know if Charles Hall is telling the truth. I don't know if the tall whites exist. It's up to you to decide. But the secret regime, the shadow government, I do believe that exists, and I'm far from the only one.
And the cabal comprises members of the 3 sisters. the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military unit, who together have become a shadow government of not only the United States, but of much of the Western world. The plan is well advanced.
Episode about the moon had me questioning NASA's lies. Hecklefish prophesy while government strategize.
Tell them about Blorpus.
The bloom approaches, consciousness expands, truth unfolds.
Gather round, because this happened. September 12, 2008. The 4:22 p.m. Metrolink left Union Station packed with commuters. Charles Peck stood in the aisle of the front car. He was 49 years old. He texted his fiancée, Andrea, "I'm almost there." That was the last message he ever sent. Minutes later, the commuter train slammed head-on into a Union Pacific freight train, both traveling over 40 miles per hour, combined impact speed 82 miles per hour. Charles Peck died instantly. 12 hours later, his family sat in a living room watching news footage of the wreckage. Then Andrea's phone lit up on the table. The caller ID said Charles. We think of telephones as everyday things, plastic and glass, good for ordering pizza or doom scrolling through social media. But since their invention, people suspected they could serve another purpose. Nikola Tesla built a radio to reach the spirit world. Thomas Edison believed he could do the same. He called it a spirit phone, a device to bridge this world and the next. In 1920, Edison told Scientific American he'd been working on an apparatus to see if it is possible for personalities which have left this earth to communicate with us. He died in 1931 without completing it, or so his assistants claimed. But these calls do happen. In 1979, scientists published the first comprehensive study of phone calls from the dead. They documented over 100 cases. 72% occurred within 24 hours of death. 89% featured heavy static or poor connection quality. 94% described voices as distant, mechanical, or hollow. Average call duration, 6 to 15 seconds. The pattern was clear. The calls were real. But were they messages from beyond or something else? Sometimes the dead call to say goodbye. Sometimes they call with a warning. Dean Koontz is famous for writing horror novels, but his most terrifying story is one he lived. Koontz was in his home on a Tuesday afternoon in 1988, working alone in a quiet house. The phone rang, an unlisted number. He picked it up and heard that heavy, rhythmic static crackling through the receiver. Then a woman's voice cut through the noise. It was faint, but distinct. It sounded exactly like his mother. But his mother had been dead for over a decade. Koontz didn't speak. He couldn't. The voice didn't say hello. It didn't ask how he was doing. It said only one thing, repeated in a flat tone. "Be careful, Dean. Be careful." It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded like a transmission from somewhere else. Then the line went dead. 2 days later, Koontz visited his father at a mental care facility. His father suffered from dementia. Koontz walked into the room, and his father looked at him, reached into a drawer, and pulled out a knife. The blade was 8 inches long and razor sharp. His father lunged and tried to stab him. Koontz caught his father's wrist, inches from his chest. His father was 73 years old, but fought like a man possessed. It took 3 orderlies to pull them apart. Koontz wrestled the knife away. He subdued his father without getting hurt. If he hadn't been on edge, if he hadn't been warned, he might not have reacted fast enough. His mother reached across whatever separates the living from the dead to save her son's life. But Charles Peck wasn't calling to warn anyone. He wasn't calling to say goodbye. He was leading them somewhere. The Chatsworth crash was the deadliest train accident in California history. I lived in LA at the time, I remember it. The impact fused the trains together into a single mass of twisted steel. The fires burned for hours. Thick black smoke was visible for 20 miles. 2,500 gallons of diesel fuel leaked from ruptured tanks. The smell of burning plastic and diesel reached Northridge 6 miles away. Andrea was at the station waiting for Charles when the news broke. She drove to the crash site, but police held her back. She joined his parents, his brother, his sister, and his stepmother in a waiting area. And they sat in that room for hours, terrified, waiting for the survivor list. Then they were waiting for the list of the dead. And then, in the middle of that silence, Andrea's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Charles. The room went still. She grabbed the phone with shaking hands and pressed answer. Charles? Baby? Are you there? She expected a voice, a cry for help, anything. She got static. That low, rhythmic hum, like wind blowing through a long tunnel, or someone trying to breathe through damaged lungs. The call lasted 6 seconds, then it dropped. The family stared at each other. Pocket dial? Glitch? Well, 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time, his son's phone rang. Caller ID? Dad. He answered. Dad, where are you? Static. Heavy, hollow silence. Then the line went dead. Then his brother's phone rang. Then his stepmother's. For the next 11 hours, his phone launched a desperate campaign. It called everyone he loved, his fiancée, his parents, his siblings, his children. 35 separate calls. Each time they answered. Each time they screamed into the receiver begging him to speak, begging him to tell them where he was. And each time they got that strange, hollow static. To the family, this meant one thing. Charles was alive. He survived the crash. He was trapped in the wreckage, maybe pinned, maybe injured too badly to speak, but he was conscious. He was holding his phone. He was pressing send. He was telling them he was still there. The family ran to the police station and shoved their phones in the officers' faces. He's calling us. Look, he's calling right now. This changed the entire operation. Before the calls, firefighters worked in recovery mode. They assumed everyone in the front car was dead. They moved carefully, treating the wreckage as a crime scene. But if a survivor was calling out, this was now a rescue mission. The fire chief sent 250 firefighters to the site. 50 paramedics stood by. They brought cutting equipment, jacks, cranes. Over 100 tons of steel had to be moved piece by piece without causing further collapse. Police contacted Verizon and traced the signal. Every call came from Peck's phone. Every ping came from the same location. The phone was broadcasting from the epicenter of the disaster, the lead passenger car, crushed to half its original size. The firefighters went back in. The work was dangerous. Wreckage twisted under immense pressure, fires still smoldering, air thick with smoke and the stench of burning plastic and diesel. But they had a target now. They cut through steel. They lifted heavy debris. Every time the phone rang, they got a fresh ping. The signal guided them through tons of twisted metal. 35 calls, 35 pings. The rescue team worked through the night, exhausted, running on adrenaline and hope. At 3:28 a.m., 12 hours after the crash, the call stopped. Maybe the phone battery died, or maybe Charles had lost consciousness. But it didn't matter. They had his location. 1 hour later, just before dawn, they broke through the final layer of debris. They aimed their flashlights into the crushed car. The beam hit a man in a seat. It was Charles. He didn't look injured. Unconscious, maybe. For a second, they thought they'd pulled off a miracle. They didn't. The rescue team rushed to him. Charles was still strapped into his seat, not pinned by machinery, not trapped under rubble. He didn't look injured. A firefighter reached out and checked for a pulse. Charles' skin was cold. Charles Peck was dead, and had been for a while. The injuries were catastrophic. Crushed thoracic cavity, severed spine, massive internal bleeding. His heart stopped instantly when the trains collided. The crash occurred at 4:22 p.m. Charles Peck died at 4:22 p.m. According to the medical examiner, brain function ceased the moment of impact. No suffering, no waiting for rescue, instantaneous death. He was dead 12 hours before they found him. He was dead before the first call to Andrea. He was dead for the call to his son, the call to his brother, the call to his stepmother. Dead for every single one of the calls that guided the rescue team through the wreck. The comfortable explanation is technical glitch. Maybe the impact short-circuited the phone. Maybe damaged wiring was causing it to randomly dial contacts from his favorites list over and over for 11 hours. But there's a problem with that theory. When firefighters found Charles, they wanted to secure his personal effects, especially the phone that guided the entire rescue operation. They checked his pockets, empty. They checked the floor around his seat, the seat pockets, the debris within arm's reach. No phone. They expanded the search, sifting through wreckage in every direction. They checked under seats and overhead compartments, beneath debris. No phone. They swept the area with metal detectors. They photographed every piece of wreckage before moving it. Standard protocol for securing evidence. They found his wallet. They found his keys. They never found the phone. The device that made 35 calls over 11 hours. The device that pinged cell towers and transmitted a signal strong enough to guide a rescue team through the wreckage was gone. It wasn't in his hand. It wasn't in his pocket. It wasn't anywhere in the car. The signal came from his seat, but the source didn't exist. Charles Peck died instantly. He didn't have a pulse, no brain activity, no phone. Yet for 11 hours, he reached out. He called the woman he was going to marry. He called the children he was leaving behind. He called everyone who loved him over and over until they found his body. And once they did, he hung up. We want to believe that when we die, we leave this world completely. But stories like this make you wonder if the connection is ever fully severed. Maybe in the static between stations, a signal can still get through. So tonight, before you go to sleep, check your phone. Make sure it's charged. Make sure the volume is on. Because if it rings in the middle of the night and the caller ID shows a name you haven't seen in years, don't be afraid. Answer it. They might need your help. Or you might need theirs. Gather round, because this happened. Abilene, Texas, January 1996. Brian Bethel sat in his car outside an empty theater parking lot. He was writing a check to pay his internet bill. He stopped under the marquee to use the light. Then a rhythmic tapping on his window. Two boys stood outside, hoodies pulled low, faces hidden. Brian rolled down the window just a crack. The boy in the green hoodie stepped forward. That's when Brian saw his eyes. Brian Bethel was a reporter, 20 years at the paper, Crime Beat. He'd interviewed murderers, documented accident scenes, covered trauma that sent other reporters to therapy. He was running an errand, nothing unusual about it. But sitting in that parking lot, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. His heart slammed against his chest. Every instinct said run. His brain didn't understand why. Not yet. The noise of the city faded away, and traffic went silent, and the wind died. Even the electrical hum of the parking lot lights stopped. The silence was absolute. Brian's ears popped, like a change in pressure, like an airplane descending, but it was instant. The hair on his arms stood straight up, and his ears popped again. Then the parking lot lights buzzing came back, and the traffic returned, but that uneasy feeling remained. Brian looked at the boys outside his window. They looked normal enough, maybe 10 or 12 years old. One was slightly taller. They had pale skin, red hair, nothing remarkable. They stood completely still. No fidgeting, no shifting weight. This is not the way kids naturally move. They stood like statues, patient and motionless. The taller boy smiled, but it was a performance. Friendliness that didn't match the stillness, the patience, the way the boys watched him.
Hey, mister, we have a problem.
That voice was wrong. Smooth and well-spoken, but didn't sound like a child's voice. It sounded like an adult imitating a child, hitting the right notes, but not quite authentic. The boy gestured toward the theater.
We want to see the movie, but we left our money at home. Could you give us a ride to my house to get the cash? It's not far.
Brian's thoughts felt slow, heavy, like he was moving underwater. But his hand moved toward the door handle without his permission. He watched his own fingers reaching for it. He tried to fight it. Tried to tell himself these were just kids who needed help. He forced himself to look directly at the boy, tried to break whatever spell had taken hold. The boy tilted his head, and light from the marquee cut across his face. No reflection, no life. Then Brian saw the boy had no eyes. Brian couldn't breathe. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline flooded his system. Every cell in his body screamed the same message: run. The boy had no eyes, not damaged eyes, not clouded eyes, voids. The entire visible surface of each eye was solid black, edge-to-edge darkness. Then the trance broke, and panic flooded in. His hand froze on the door lock, then snatched back like he touched a hot stove. The change in the boys was immediate. The polite act dropped. The taller boy's expression shifted to cold fury, a fury that wasn't human. He didn't scream or pound on the glass, he just stared with those impossible black eyes. An itch formed in Brian's skull, pressure building. The taller boy's voice was so calm, so reasonable.
We just need to get to our mother's house. It won't take long.
Brian's fingers touched the lock again. He didn't decide to do it, his hand just moved. The kid didn't sound like a kid anymore. His voice dropped. It sounded cold. It sounded dead.
We can't come in unless you invite us. Let us in. We don't have a gun.
Brian hadn't mentioned guns, hadn't thought about guns. If the boy was trying to reassure him, he just made it worse. Then Brian thought about what the kid just said. They needed permission. He couldn't just open the door himself, like some rule prevented it.
We can't come in unless you tell us we can.
It was almost like the boy's voice was coming from inside Brian's brain. He looked down. His hand was an inch from the lock. He had to get out of here. Brian slammed his foot on the gas. The tires squealed. He spun the wheel and tore out of the parking lot. He checked the mirror. The street behind him was empty. The parking lot was empty. The boys were gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone. Brian drove home fast. He ran into his house, threw the deadbolt, checked every window. He turned on every light and sat in his living room holding a kitchen knife until the sun came up. The next day, he did what any journalist would do. He wrote down everything that happened. Then he published the account online. He titled it simply BEK, Black-Eyed Kids. Within hours, the email started. A cop with 20 years on the force, a nurse, a software engineer, all with the same story. 2 children, black eyes, that polite request. And every email said, "I've never been that scared in my entire life." The emails came from everywhere, different states, different witnesses, but the same story. The details matched too perfectly to be a coincidence. Always at night, always a knock or a tap to announce their presence, always a mundane request, a phone call, directions, a ride home, and always that wall of silence, the sudden drop in temperature, the overwhelming sense that a predator is nearby. Portland, 1998. A software engineer leaving downtown late at night. 3 kids on a street corner, 2 boys, 1 girl. They tried to guilt him. One said, "You promised you'd help us." He'd never seen them before. As his car passed, he saw their eyes in the streetlight. Solid black. Different state, different witness, same eyes. The reports kept coming. Over 1,200 documented accounts, 47 countries, same eyes, same silence, same requests. But there was one strange pattern repeated across every account, every country, every year. 100% of documented cases show the same limitation. They cannot enter without permission. They can't get into your car unless you unlock the door. They can't cross your threshold unless you invite them. They're bound by some ancient law that even they can't break. So they manipulate, they beg, they weaponize guilt.
It's freezing out here, mister.
We're just kids. Why are you scared of us?
Please. Our mom will be so worried.
They use human empathy as a weapon. We're programmed to help children. Evolution wired us that way. They know exactly which buttons to push. But here's what keeps researchers up at night. We have hundreds of accounts from people who refused, people who listened to their instincts, who drove away, who kept the door locked. We have 0 first-hand accounts from anyone who let them in. No blog post describing what happened next. No police reports filed the following morning. No social media updates. The people who open the door don't tell their stories. Brian Bethel still lives in Abilene. He still works as a journalist. In 2013, a reporter asked if he still thinks about that night.
I've covered murders, accidents, all kinds of trauma. Nothing compares to that level of fear.
Not that long ago, he found 2 small handprints on his car window. That's scary enough. But what really bothers Brian, the handprints were on the inside. Gather round, because this happened. Charleston, South Carolina, 1995. Sonny Graham lay in a hospital bed. His heart was enlarged and failing. Doctors gave him weeks to live. 200 miles away, a man named Terry Cottle put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Terry's heart was strong. Doctors rushed it to Charleston and transplanted it into Sonny's chest. Sonny woke up with a new pulse, feeling stronger than he had in years. But Sonny inherited more from Terry than just his heart. A lot more. Sonny Graham was a popular guy at Hilton Head. As manager of the central plant, he knew just about everyone on the Barrier Island. His cooking was legendary at fundraisers and community events. The local high school football field was named in his honor. He and his wife were married 38 years, 2 children. In 1994, a virus attacked Sonny's heart muscle. The damage was severe. By 1995, Sonny was 56 years old and dying. His name went on 2 transplant lists. He waited, and his heart kept failing. One evening, Sonny got the call. A heart had become available. Terry Cottle's heart, close to a perfect match. Terry Cottle spent 4 days on life support. A .22 caliber slug entered his skull just behind his right ear. He was 33 years old. That day, his wife Cheryl agreed to take him off life support. His organs could save lives. The surgery went well. Within 6 months, Sonny was strong enough to go on a fishing trip to Alaska. But something was different. Sonny had always hated hot dogs. The smell, the taste, everything about them. Now he ate them every day, sometimes 2 or 3. He developed a taste for beer and heavy metal music. He never cared about beer and metal before. His wife started seeing changes. Sonny's handwriting looked different. He walked differently. He laughed differently. She said he seemed like a different person. His friends noticed too, friends that he had for 40 years or more. But Sonny felt something else, something he couldn't explain to anyone. He felt a pull toward the donor's family. He needed to thank them, to meet them, to understand who had given him this second chance. In late 1996, he wrote the donor's widow. Her name was Cheryl Cottle. She agreed to meet him. They met at a restaurant in Charleston in January 1997. The moment Sonny saw her, his chest tightened. He felt a physical jolt, a sudden acceleration that didn't feel like attraction or nerves. It felt like recognition. His heart beat faster when she smiled. It slammed against his ribs when she spoke. He felt a rush of emotion that didn't belong to him. Love, guilt, and a desperate need to protect this woman. Cheryl felt it too. She said later that meeting Sonny was like seeing Terry again. Cheryl was only 30 years old. She looked at this older man with gray hair and weathered hands, but she felt her dead husband's presence. She felt him looking through Sonny's eyes. Sonny went home to his wife that night, but he couldn't stop thinking about Cheryl. He called her. They talked for hours. He visited her. He felt compelled to take care of her in ways he couldn't explain. Soon, Sonny's marriage fell apart. His wife couldn't compete with a ghost. That April, Cheryl married another man. Sonny gave away the bride, standing in for her late father. Sonny watched her walk towards someone else, but it was Terry's heart pounding in his chest. That marriage didn't last either. Both couples fell apart under the weight of what neither could explain, the pull between Sonny and Cheryl that defied reason. Cheryl married Sonny in December 2004. 2 different men, same heart. And that heart was bringing her husband back. For a while, things felt right. Sonny felt younger, he had a new wife, a new heart, a new beginning. Then the depression started. Terry Cottle hadn't just died, he'd killed himself. He was a man who struggled with depression he couldn't escape. He put a gun to his head because the weight of living became unbearable. And now something dark lived inside Sonny. His personality shifted. Friends who'd known him for decades said they didn't recognize him anymore. The gentle, kind man who was the first to do a friend a favor, that man was disappearing. And Sonny talked about feeling trapped, about living someone else's life, about thoughts that didn't feel like his own. Sonny became moody and withdrawn. He grew possessive, jealous in ways he'd never been. He accused Cheryl of seeing other men. He followed her car. He checked her phone. Then the fight started. The relationship turned toxic. Sonny felt trapped in a life he didn't recognize. He said he didn't feel like himself anymore. He felt like a passenger in his own body, watching someone else make decisions. In 2007, Sonny drew up a will. He asked his nephew to be the executor. He organized his finances, paid off debts, settled accounts. People noticed. They asked if he was okay. Sonny said he was fine, just getting things in order. The beer, the hot dogs, the instant love for Cheryl, his handwriting changed to match Terry's looser, more careless style. These weren't coincidences. These were Terry's preferences, Terry's traits, Terry's life. Sonny walked a path already walked. He followed footprints that weren't his own. The years passed. Whatever joy Sonny found in his second chance evaporated. Instead, Sonny had a sense of impending doom. He was living Terry Cottle's life, and he knew how that life ended. April 1st, 2008, 12 years, 12 days after the transplant. Neighbors in Vidalia, Georgia were jolted awake by the sound of a shotgun blast. That morning, Sonny Graham drank his coffee and told Cheryl he was taking his 9-year-old stepson to the dentist, then off to work. A normal day. But Sonny made a detour to his backyard shed. There, the 69-year-old picked up the 12-gauge shotgun he'd taken on countless hunting trips. He pointed the muzzle at the right side of his throat, just like Terry did all those years ago. Then Sonny pulled the trigger. It was April 1st, almost exactly 13 years since another man's suicide gave Sonny Graham a second chance at life. Different weapon, same method, same location. Sonny Graham died instantly. He left Cheryl a widow for the second time. 2 husbands lost, both to self-inflicted gunshots to the head. 2 men, 1 heart, same fate. The story spread across the world. Reporters wrote about cellular memory and whether organs could hold a suicide gene. The internet lit up with theories. Scientists documented this phenomenon for decades. Personality changes following heart transplantation. 4 categories: changes in preferences, alterations in emotions and temperament, modifications of identity, and memories from the donor's life. The heart contains about 40,000 neurons, a network that operates independently of the brain. A heart-brain that communicates bidirectionally with the brain and other organs. Researchers documented this cardiac nervous system in the early 1990s. Some theorized that cellular memory could transfer personality characteristics from donor to recipient. Studies of 73 heart transplant patients showed 89% reported personality changes after receiving their organ. And not subtle shifts, fundamental alterations in who they were. Claire Sylvia received a heart-lung transplant from an 18-year-old male motorcyclist. She suddenly craved beer and chicken nuggets, food she later learned were her donor's favorites. She dreamed about a man named Tim L. Her donor's name was Tim. A woman received a heart from a police officer killed in the line of duty. She started seeing flashes of light in her eyes, feeling burning sensations on her cheeks. She later learned the officer was shot in the face. A 5-year-old boy received the heart of a 3-year-old named Tim. The recipient had never been told the donor's name. He called his donor Timmy. He said Timmy got hurt when he fell down and likes Power Rangers. Well, Tim fell from a window ledge, reaching for a Power Ranger toy. The theories exist. The documentation exists. The cases stack up, one after another. People receiving organs and receiving something else. Preferences, memories, traits that aren't even their own. But theories don't explain the weight of it. The lived experience of looking in the mirror and not recognizing yourself, of loving someone you've never met, of walking toward a shed with a shotgun because something inside you, something that isn't you, knows exactly what to do. Sonny Graham's heart remembered what his brain never knew. It remembered Terry's widow. It remembered Terry's pain. And when the time came, it remembered Terry's choice to end it all.
Freedom. Liberty.
From sea to shining sea.
Vote Hecklefish. Other candidates say they will lower taxes.
But I say April 15th should just be another day, because taxes are theft.
Other candidates are promising to bring down grocery prices.
But I promise a crab cat in every pot, with boiling water, and corn, and a side of potatoes, and a vat of melted butter. Who else is promising you butter? Nobody!
Other candidates say we need less government intervention.
I say we need no government at all, just me in a big house. Preferably a White House. I'm not a politician. I'm one of you. Sort of. I'm a fish of the people. And we all want the same thing. Independence. And in these trying times, America needs a leader who isn't afraid to say what everyone's thinking, even if no one's actually thinking it.
He's not a clownfish like those other candidates.
I'm a goldfish. Vote for me. You won't regret it. Show your community exactly where you stand. With me, Hecklefish J. Moriarty. Available now is the Hecklefish for President yard sign, bumper sticker, and campaign button. Or if you're feeling really patriotic, get all three in one convenient package. You're gonna love my package.
Hecklefish. The hero we deserve.
This ad was paid for and approved by the Hecklefish for President campaign.
How do you join a cult without knowing it? Well, here's how it happened to thousands of people in San Francisco just a few years ago. You're with a trusted friend, maybe on a hike or sitting in a bar or just hanging out. Then out of nowhere, your friend asks, "Can you keep a secret?" Well, of course, you reply that you can. Your friend then hands you a small black sleeve about the size of a credit card. On one side of the sleeve, embossed in gold, is a geometric pattern. On the other side, the words "absolute discretion." Inside is a security card printed with a website and a code. Later that night, you go to the site and enter the code, and the website responds with, "Congratulations, you've been invited to the Latitude." And what happens next changes you forever. After entering your code, you set up an appointment to visit the San Francisco house. You're ordered to tell no one and come alone. You arrive at a nondescript building and swipe your card through the electronic lock. The door opens. You're now in a narrow hallway painted matte black. From invisible speakers, an ominous pulsing sound is heard. On the walls are two red lights which fade in and out in time with the sound. High above you in the room, like every room in the Latitude, is a camera. You are being watched. At the end of the hall is an ornate Victorian mantle of some kind, but where you'd expect to find a fireplace is the entrance to a wooden slide. And the slide curves down into the darkness, so there's no way to tell where it leads.
There's no sign or instructions or nothing?
Nope.
How do you know this doesn't lead to something awful like sharks or snakes or a K-pop concert?
You don't. To go any further inside the Latitude, you must literally go down a rabbit hole with no idea what awaits you at the bottom. After a quick and gentle trip down the slide, you're deposited into a basement room called the Flux Chamber. On one side of the room is a series of doors. On the other is a bright neon sign that says, shh. And under that sign, behind glass, is a ticket taker. But the glass is so heavily frosted that you can't really see the person's face. You simply hear their voice. You're given a claim ticket and asked to turn over all your personal belongings, your wallet, purse, phone, keys, everything in your pockets. You're told this is for your own safety.
I don't like where this is going.
Once you've complied with this request, you hear a door unlock. You enter and close the door behind you. It's dark. So dark that you have no idea if you're in a huge room or a closet. You can't see your hands in front of your face. And it's so quiet that it almost feels like the air is being sucked out of the room. And after a second or two, you hear a muffled click as the door locks you in. You now have no choice but to go forward into the black, without your wallet, without your phone, without your eyes. In the black, you feel your way around everything. Floor to ceiling is covered in thick carpet. And as you move forward, the passageway gets smaller and smaller, closing in around you. You can no longer stand. You have to literally crawl forward. If you're claustrophobic or afraid of the dark, panic is going to set in pretty quickly. Now, moving slowly on your hands and knees, you hear music playing. You keep moving and see a hint of light. You reach the end of the passage and you draw back a heavy black curtain. You're now in a small 6-sided room lined with books, all of which say the latitude, and all the pages are blank. A voice from somewhere tells you to place a book on a podium and open it. The lights go out, and suddenly the blank pages of the book you chose begin to show you a story. This is called The Fable. And the fable talks about an ancient society that walled itself off from the rest of the world. But 12 brave citizens dug a tunnel under the wall in order to bring their philosophy to other cultures. Now, after the fable is told, you see the words absolute discretion, the lights come back on, and you're instructed by name to move on. So you enter another small door and continue crawling through the dark.
Again, you crawl?
Yeah?
Who started this cult? A knee doctor?
I don't see how.
And you crawl to another secret room, which has a stack of business cards that say, do you have knee and joint pain? Call Jeffrey Rosen, MD, Latitude Orthopedics. Huh? You like that, huh?
The next room you find looks like an old office. There's a couch, coffee table, and a vintage phone. The phone has one button that blinks for your attention. You pick up the receiver.
You have been selected out of many and were chosen for a reason. One of our members has great faith in you. In bright axiom, my friend.
You exit the room, gather your belongings, walk back out to the street. Now, on the ground, embedded into the sidewalk itself, is the mysterious hex logo of the Latitude. Now, people walk by, going about their day, completely unaware of the absolute bizarre experiences going on inside. You yourself aren't quite sure what just happened. Then, your cell phone rings. The voice on the other end of the phone tells you you've been chosen for a special mission. Over the next few hours, a series of calls and texts directs you around the city on sort of an urban scavenger hunt. Now, at one point, you're told to go to a local bar, give the bartender your card, and say nothing. The bartender then slides you a heavy brass coin, and on the coin it says, absolute discretion. A few minutes later, you get a text sending you to another address, and when you arrive, you see the hex logo stamped in the cement. This is the place. You get another text with a door code. You try it. It works. You see the hex logo on the stairwell. You walk up the stairs following the clues that have now become familiar. And when you reach your designated floor, it's just a row of offices. But one of the doors has a key card lock, and the door is labeled Den Arcadia. So you try your card. It works. The room is covered in ornate psychedelic murals, and in the middle of the room are 5 vintage arcade games. So you put in your coin and start playing. Now, at first the game plays normally, but after a minute or so, it glitches out and you see a mysterious glowing figure.
Who disturbs my coma?
This is Quas, the gatekeeper of the Latitude. Now, Quas gives you a secret word. He then instructs you to go home to your glowing box and enter the signal. Back home, you enter the code on the Latitude website. You're then shown a video of Professor Walter Kinley.
The latitude for us has a double meaning, as you can see. On the one hand, latitude means geographic breadth, width, a sense of leeway.
The professor welcomes you to the Latitude Society as a compeer, and he then gets on a boat and sails away. You then choose a society's secret name called a moniker, and you now have access to all the perks of the Latitude Society.
Like, what kind of perks?
Well, you can go to their e-commerce store and buy Latitude merchandise like t-shirts, keychains, and other swag.
Ah, there it is.
You can also attend secret gatherings called praxises. You can participate in other events, which are called jaunts. But most importantly, you can now invite others to join the society. For about $30 each, you can purchase those mysterious Latitude security cards. And as long as you use absolute discretion, you can buy as many cards as you like.
This is a pretty complicated way to sell merch.
It is. And this is one of the reasons for the downfall of the Latitude, at least this version of it. To learn what went wrong and what happened to the Latitude Society, we have to pull back the curtain. And that leads us to the Latitude's founder and chief visionary. His name is Jeff Hull.
You know, like for some people, heaven and hell is reality.
Jeff Hull is a Silicon Valley tycoon / artist. He worked for his father's financial firm and made a bundle when they sold the business for $500 million. Hull went on to create a company called Nonchalance, which specializes in real-world immersive storytelling. Things like escape rooms or murder mysteries is this type of entertainment. And Nonchalance uses the urban landscape as a canvas on which to paint these interactive narratives. Another well-known Nonchalance experience was called the Jejune Institute. And its format was similar to the Latitude, but maybe a little more sinister. Jejune needs its own video, but if you're interested in things like this, I'll link you to a documentary in the description. The TV show Dispatches from Elsewhere, starring Jason Segel, is based on the Jejune Institute. So check that out if you want to learn more about how these immersive experiences work. So what was the intention of the Latitude Society? Was it a game? Yes. Was it a business? Yes. But was it a cult? Well,
what are the things that like a cult would do, you know? Separate yourself from your friends. Well, absolute discretion might be that, right? Ask for money. Oh shit, like, you know, they have, like, it was a gift shop beforehand, but now all of a sudden it's like, if you want to continue on.
In the early days of the Latitude Society, the intent was to create amazing immersive experiences to attract corporate clients who wanted to commission their own experiences. Whether for entertainment, team building, or marketing, Jeff Hull believed he could use the Latitude as proof of concept to raise funding. And he needed to. The society cost about $3,000 per day to operate, and Hull put about $2 million of his own money in. But after 3 years, the Latitude couldn't sustain itself. So Hull introduced some controversial policies. Initially, members could invite anyone they wanted to for free, but eventually invitation cards cost $25, which was soon raised to $32 per card. Now, members didn't like this. Then Hull announced that there would be a membership fee of about $300 per year. This caused full-scale outrage. Members argued that when they invited someone to join, they were giving them a gift, and asking them to pay for their gift was rude.
So everyone just wanted all of this for free?
They did.
Ingrates.
Well, Jeff Hull kind of felt the same way. The Latitude Society had over 3,000 members, but even if all of them paid their membership dues, paid for invitation cards, bought merchandise, you still fall way short of the $100,000 per month the Latitude needed to be self-sustaining.
So what did that guy do?
The only thing you do with a failing startup. He shut it down. But this was easier said than done. Jeff Hull and the Latitude Society were so good at creating an experience so immersive that members couldn't distinguish it from reality. Now, whether intentional or not, that's how cults are created.
I totally underestimated the power that the story can have upon certain people.
No matter what kind of life you lead, most of it falls into the mundane, day in, day out, and you're going through the motions. So when someone invites you to join a mysterious secret society, it's only natural to be intrigued. And this secrecy is attractive. People love to belong, and if it's something exclusive, that creates scarcity. It makes you feel special. Now, I remember when the only way to join Gmail was if someone invited you. And when Facebook launched, you could only join if you were a student currently enrolled in college. You know, we preach over and over about how labeling people is bad, but if we're honest, we all have labels that we've given to ourselves that we're proud of. Maybe it's our country, our political party, our religion, or our favorite sports team. We want to be in a tribe. Now, during a Latitude gathering or praxis, there's going to be crazy rituals like chanting, dancing, costumes, all kinds of things that would look silly to outsiders, but Latitude members fully committed to their roles. These experiences were special to them. They were important to the tribe. And the invitation system is genius. People want to be Promethean, meaning they want to be the holders of knowledge who teach that knowledge to others. So think about an obscure band or TV show that you discovered before anyone else. It made you feel cool to be early, to be first. The person who initiates you into the Latitude Society is called your ascendant, and you are their descendant. Tribes have hierarchies, and people like rising in the ranks. The more people you bring into the society, the more descendants you have. The higher you rise in the tribe. Genius. There's a specific model of identifying cults developed by Stephen Hassan, and it's called the BITE model of control, B-I-T-E. That's behavior, information, thought, and emotion. So let's see how the Latitude shapes up.
I was actually a little bit nervous that I was going to be kidnapped or that, there was going to be some kind of crazy pagan ritual with some kind of sacrifice or something like that. I didn't really know what to expect.
At the top of the behavioral control section of the BITE model is regulate an individual's physical reality. Latitude does this by design. Then there's isolation from non-members. Absolute discretion certainly covers this. Then there's controlling what clothes you wear. Now look at this shot of the Latitude's Elder Council. Notice everyone's wearing a Latitude sash, and on the sash are various pins and insignia showing your rank in the organization's hierarchy. Even Jeff Hull himself is wearing what looks to be a military uniform. Now this is similar to what the leader of Scientology wears. Did you just beat me?
Had to. We had to call it the Tom Cruise thing.
The Tom Cruise thing? That's Scientology.
Hey, look, if you say the S word, they're gonna come after us with lawyers and video cameras.
Good point. I in the BITE model is information control. Cults use deception. Latitude does this. Information is not freely available to outsiders. Spying is used. Cult-generated propaganda is created. Also, information is shared unproportionally. One ex-Latitude member complained that she had to give the society all kinds of personal information about herself, but when she asked how that information was going to be used and who had access to it, she was told she didn't need to know. Now, Latitude checks all of these boxes. T is thought control. Members are encouraged to take on a new identity.
So, what's your moniker?
Shalico.
Welcome, Shalico.
Techniques are used to alter mental states. Members are required to take the cult's doctrine as truth. Meditating, chanting, praying, and rituals are used to instill a new map of reality.
Checks all the boxes.
All the boxes. E is emotional control. This includes making you feel like the cult can help you reach your full potential. Another thing cults do to manipulate emotion is shunning those that leave. In an excellent article in Vice, one former member talks about how after she left the society, her roommates stopped telling her where they were going, and they treated her as suspicious. The Latitude Society checks a lot of these boxes. Even active members posted anonymously on Reddit asking others, is this a cult? They were worried that they, like most cult members, joined by accident. That's pretty scary. Did the founder of the Latitude Society, Jeff Hull, set out to form a cult? Well, I don't think he did, but whether intentional or not, he seems to have an intuition for how to manipulate people. Now, fortunately, I don't think he tried to do any harm, nor did he try to enrich himself. He could have taken advantage of his members, but he didn't. So this leads to a deeper and potentially dangerous question. A religion is defined as a group of people adhering to a specific set of beliefs. A cult is defined as a group of people adhering to a specific set of beliefs.
Yeah, that's the same definition.
It is. But religion is widely accepted. Cults, not so much. Nobody can argue that religions have or had cruel practices, and many people who leave cults felt that while they were in them, their lives were better. So what's the difference between a cult and a religion? I don't have the answer. Do you? Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. My name is AJ, that's Hecklefish. This has been the Y-Files. If you had fun or learned anything, do me a favor, like, comment, subscribe, share. All that stuff really helps out the channel. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated.
Hi, I'm Dave. I've been streaming the Y files for 72 hours straight.
Hi, Dave.
Now I see conspiracies in my cereal.
The cereal knows things.
Paul Benowitz lived next to a large Air Force base. When he saw colored lights in the sky, he assumed they were experimental aircraft. Then he started picking up strange radio signals that seemed to be an alien language. He took his findings to the Air Force. Publicly, they denied the UFO alien story, but privately, they confirmed Paul's findings. The Air Force even funded his UFO research. He spent several years gathering evidence and reporting it to the authorities. Then, he ended up in a mental institution. Let's find out why. In 1969, while pursuing his PhD in physics, Paul Benowitz started a successful electronics company in New Mexico called Thunder Scientific.
No, that's a pretty badass name for a company.
It is.
Thunder. Ooh, 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 thunder. Ooh, 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 thunder. Ooh. AC/DC.
I know who it is. Paul Benowitz's primary clients were the Air Force and NASA. He did so much business with the Air Force that he actually bought a home and established a lab right next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. Now, Kirtland is a big facility. It's one of the largest Air Force installations in the country. It has science labs, weapons testing areas, observatories, and huge storage facilities for nuclear weapons. From the second floor deck of his house, Paul frequently saw strange colored lights in the sky around the Air Force Base, lights that were moving too fast to be aircraft. Now, Paul documented and filmed everything he saw. Then Paul Benowitz had an idea. He was an engineer, a physicist, and an expert in electronics. So he set up his radio equipment and detected transmissions on a frequency in the gigahertz range, much higher than the military used at that time. As a pilot and military contractor, Paul Benowitz knew what Air Force signals sounded like, but this was something very different. He analyzed these signals and realized they were data bursts, and in the data were messages.
But the Air Force has said time and time again, and this is a quote from Richard Horner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development. All but a small percentage of these reports of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire, end quote. What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the commanding general of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real. In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top secret estimate to the commanding general, Hoyt Vandenberg, said these were interplanetary spaceships. In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs, and in 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Air Force had a special panel of scientists meet at the Pentagon to tell them what to do. And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof, but you have a very strong circumstantial case. We suggest you quadruple the investigation, set up special observation posts, in the meantime, release everything you've got to the American people. And they have been spending a lot of money investigating flying saucers. If they don't exist, why the money? Why did the intelligence teams rush out every time there's a sighting?
The data bursts Paul Benowitz received had noticeable patterns. Now, Paul couldn't make sense of the data manually, but he did have access to an early home computer. And using an operating system and software he wrote himself, he fed the alien broadcast to the computer. At first, the messages were nonsense. So Paul deployed a very old but effective cryptoanalyst trick, context. He told his program to assume that the messages would have words like ship, base, air, water, and time. That worked.
Yeah, but how do you learn to speak alien so you can translate it into English?
Good question. You don't. You use the computer to put everything in context. For example, let's say we knew the transmission had something to do with making coffee. You tell the computer the context. You have it look for patterns that coincide with beans, water, sugar, milk, and so on. And once you have the main patterns, you can expand to phrases used less frequently, like grind, brew, and drink. Eventually, you have a pretty good syntax. You don't know what the exact words are, but you do know what they mean. Paul's first translations were almost meaningless, but he kept at it and eventually had a general idea of what the messages were saying. His translation wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to give him an idea of what the aliens wanted and why they were here. Then he did something I'd consider ill-advised. Using the language he decoded, he sent his own message on that same frequency, and shortly after that, he received a reply. This was the first message Paul decoded.
Round. Women of Earth are needed. Flexible the next discharges. Our ship. Oh, women, do not command the North among us. You have many friends. Water very short. Resist all attempts at alteration. Listen, Orange, make peace.
Sounds peaceful enough, though women of Earth are needed is kind of ominous. Here's the next message.
Victory. Our bases obtain supplies from the starship metal. Time is yanked. Message hit star. Using rejuvenation methods got us in trouble. Six Sky we realized tell you all might help you.
All your base up belong to us.
It does kind of sound like that. And there are lots of these messages. This one is interesting.
Take vast portion universe against our aggression. The number of our crashed saucers is 8. Nerve you we realize tell the truth. Jump opposite. Alien forces mean no help to you. Metal we come invisible. Keeping change we will not join sides with anyone, but our race is dying on the home planet.
Paul Benowitz now had the first two-way communication with an alien civilization. He suspected that they were not here for good reasons, so he used this communication to try and learn their intentions and hopefully find vulnerabilities. Through many messages back and forth, Paul did learn the aliens' intentions. They weren't good. Paul Benowitz learned that the aliens' homeworld was dying and there were multiple alien races on Earth. Many of them looked like the typical gray alien with large eyes, but there's also a race of Homo sapien aliens that look just like us, but better looking.
Valiant Thor!
Exactly. Link below. Now at this point, Paul Benowitz was convinced an invasion was imminent and people had to be warned. He prepared a dossier of his theory and findings and went to the Air Force. Paul was a veteran and trusted military contractor, so he was granted a meeting. Benowitz was adamant that Americans be warned right away so they could prepare and defend themselves.
They thought he was a nutcase, didn't they?
Nope. The government took him very seriously. The base commander brought in the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, or OSI, to review Paul's work, and they were impressed. Agent Richard Doty was assigned to Paul's case. Doty visited Paul's house and reviewed all the film, radio equipment, and everything that Paul was using to document and communicate with the aliens. The Air Force agreed to fund Paul's research as long as he delivered his findings directly to them, and he agreed. Paul Benowitz went to work. With the help of the Air Force, and specifically Agent Richard Doty, Paul was convinced he could gather enough intel to defeat the aliens and save the human race.
You believe, in part, that the movies E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, were not entirely just the creative products of some Hollywood director, that maybe there's more to that. Why don't you explain?
They were carefully guided by representatives from MJ12, who is this organization that is in charge of the cover-up, in order to get us ready for the release of the information that there are indeed aliens. And in both those movies, they used small little creatures and in order to get us ready for this release of information.
So to prepare us that the idea of benevolent aliens from outer space are going to help us out.
Unfortunately, they're not so benevolent. So they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes when E.T. was put out. At that time was before we discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception. And they were trying to get us used to the benevolent little creatures, but that isn't the case.
In the late 1970s and early 80s, Bill Moore was a rising star in the UFO community. In 1980, he released a book called The Roswell Incident. Until Moore came along, nobody really knew much about Roswell or cared about it, but Moore's book would bring Roswell back into the public eye. And almost all the details we know about the Roswell UFO crash come from his book. When Bill Moore asked Paul Benowitz if they could meet, of course Paul said yes. The two men became friends and met every few months for the next year. And during that year, Paul complained that he sent a tremendous amount of data to the Air Force every week and nothing was coming of it. And then in 1981, Bill Moore gave Paul Benowitz a secret government file called Project Aquarius, dated a year earlier. When Paul read the document, he couldn't believe it. The 7602 Air Force Intelligence Group was analyzing all of Paul's data, but never told him. This was proof that the Air Force was taking him seriously. But why lie to him about it? Then Bill Moore said very carefully and very quietly, "Paul, you'd better be very careful with what you do with this. Use it for your own research, but otherwise just sit on it." Now, the last paragraph of the Aquarius document is this.
The official U.S. government policy and results of Project Aquarius is still classified top secret, with no dissemination outside official intelligence channels and with restricted access to MG-12. Case on Benowitz is being monitored by NASA/INENS, who request all future evidence be forwarded to them through AFOSI/IVOD because of a chance of public exposure.
Oh, did that thing just mention MJ-12?
Yep. Bill Moore and Paul Benowitz had no idea what this was. This was the first time Majestic 12 appeared in a document. And if you want a full episode on Majestic 12, email me or let me know in the comments. But in short, Majestic 12 is a group of 12 people who control the flow of information, all the information about UFOs. Every sighting, investigation, and even the slightest mention of a UFO, Majestic 12 is notified, and only Majestic 12 could decide how to proceed. Now, Paul, being a pilot, started doing flyovers of where he thought the underground base was, Archuleta Mesa near Dulce, New Mexico. He took pictures of domes, vents going underground, and saw huge towers, and he put all the photos in his reports. And this would continue for several years, but then something scary happened. In monitoring the alien transmissions, it appeared that there was a relationship or agreement between the aliens and the United States government, but that relationship broke down. On Paul's next flight, he saw scorched patches of ground, flattened trees, and even downed aircraft. It was as if a battle had taken place over Dulce. Now, if America was to win a war with the aliens, it would need a new weapon and a strategy. Fortunately, Paul Benowitz had both.
The United States Army presents The Big Picture, an official report produced for the armed forces and the American people.
Fantasy? Not at all. What you see on the screen at this moment, and will see in greater detail a bit later in this film, is a glimpse of the United States Army in the years that lie just ahead of us. This is a report on the Army's effort to prepare for the challenges of that future. It is a report on the Army's effort to achieve a sharper sword and stronger shield with which it can do its assigned part in preserving the peace, or if necessary, defending the nation and the free world against whatever enemy might rise against it.
Using the huge amounts of information he intercepted from the alien transmissions, Paul Benowitz created a document called Project Beta. Project Beta included the alien takeover plan, and a strategy to defeat them, and a weapon we can use against them. He even built a working prototype of this energy weapon. Project Beta said that the aliens have abducted, conservatively, 300,000 Americans, and they have all been implanted with devices and returned to the general population. And these implants turned every human into a walking camera and microphone. And the implants could be used to create false memories, seize control of the mind, or even switch the brain off altogether. And experiments were being done in the base under Dulce. Horrific genetic experiments like splicing alien DNA with humans. And Paul Benowitz sent Project Beta to his senators and other elected officials, even to the President of the United States. The only reply he got was a standard form letter that said Project Blue Book has been closed and the Air Force no longer investigates UFOs. Paul knew this was a lie. He had the Project Aquarius document that proved it. The only thing that made sense was that the government was compromised. It could be that senior military officials, politicians, and even the president himself could have been implanted. And over the next couple of years, Paul Benowitz became more and more frustrated and paranoid. When Bill Moore and Richard Doty paid him a visit to check on his mental state, it wasn't good. Paul kept knives and guns all over the house. He insisted that he was being watched and followed all the time. He lost so much weight that he looked ill, and he was smoking a full pack of cigarettes every hour. He said the aliens were coming into his house at night, injecting him with something that made him drive out into the desert. Then he'd be back home with no recollection of what happened. Both Bill Moore and Richard Doty said they saw needle marks on his arm. By now, Bill Moore, Richard Doty, and all Paul's friends were telling him to stop, to leave it alone. Paul's family begged him to stop. They wanted him to destroy all the equipment and go back to focusing on his business. But Paul wouldn't do it. His research was too important. Paul's mental health continued to decline. He didn't trust anyone around him. He thought his wife had an alien implant. His children had to take over his business. He became so paranoid that one day he barricaded himself in his house and covered every door and window with sandbags. His family had seen enough. They committed Paul to a psychiatric facility. And after multiple hospitalizations, Paul Benowitz died in 2003 at the age of 75. He spent the last 25 years of his life paranoid, obsessed, and in mental agony because he could not get anyone to believe what he knew about the aliens. Even with all the evidence, it literally drove him insane. But what's really sad is none of it was necessary, because the entire story about the aliens, the secret base, the transmissions, the genetic experiments, the abductions, the plot to take over the world, all of it was a lie. It was all a made-up story fed to him by Richard Doty and the United States government.
Oh, you gotta be freaking kidding me.
The Air Force Office of Special Investigation, or OSI, has a couple of purposes. One of those is counterintelligence. A common technique of counterintelligence is disinformation. When Paul Benowitz intercepted signals from Kirtland Air Base, he didn't really think they were aliens, not at first. He was concerned that if he could detect transmissions from the base, then anyone could, including Soviet spies. And after reviewing Paul's equipment and research in detail, the Air Force realized that Paul was right. The signals were coming from the base and were vulnerable. That's a problem. When the Air Force reviewed Paul's photos and film, the objects that seemed to be UFOs were actually secret experimental aircraft. That's another problem. Rather than tell Paul Benowitz the truth, which according to the Air Force would compromise security, Special Agent Richard Doty was given an assignment: feed Paul Benowitz information to lead him to believe that he had discovered a hostile alien presence.
Why not just tell him to back off?
Because the Air Force didn't know who Paul's friends were. If Paul was compromised by a Soviet agent, the Soviets would know there were secret projects happening on the base, so the Air Force would go a different way. Now, at first, this was just a simple nod from Doty.
All I had to do was say, well, you know what, Paul? Maybe what you did see was UFOs.
So nothing very specific, but over time, the lies Doty told Paul became more detailed, and other government agencies got in on the action. At some point, Paul was sure he was being watched from the vacant house across the street. Now, it was easy to say this was Paul's paranoia and not take him seriously. But Paul was right. The National Security Agency was surveilling him from that house. And to make things even worse, the alien transmissions that Paul decoded, they were actually sent from the NSA. The NSA also swapped out Paul's computer to ensure that he would decode the messages the way they wanted him to see them. It was all fake, and Paul Benowitz ate it up, and suffered because of it. Paul was a victim of the government's counterintelligence plan, but he wasn't the only one.
Look, we've established in history and documents through the Freedom of Information Act, the CIA and the military complex as a whole has really aimed to essentially mislead the public when it comes to UFOs. Tell them something that necessarily is not the truth. We've seen it time and time again through the decades, over and over and over.
When author Bill Moore's celebrity within the UFO community was at its peak, he was contacted by someone in government intelligence. We now know that was Richard Doty. Doty offered Bill Moore a deal. Moore would receive government documents on UFOs and learn what the government was hiding. But in exchange, he would disseminate Doty's fake UFO stories and report on people within the UFO community. Doty wanted to know who the UFO enthusiasts were and what they knew. The fear was that if Paul Benowitz could intercept secret military data, then other people could. Now, it's never been confirmed, but it's believed that during this time, the United States was building and testing either stealth or drone technology at Kirtland Air Base. This was information that absolutely could not fall into an enemy's hands. So this is how Paul Benowitz came to know Bill Moore. It was a setup. Moore was given the Aquarius document and instructed to give it to Paul. But here's where the counter-intel campaign starts to get sloppy. Bill Moore had seen the Aquarius document. Of course, he was fascinated by it. And at that time, Moore thought the information and documents he was getting were legitimate. But when Moore was given the Aquarius document to forward to Paul Benowitz, it was different. Details were changed. Doty brushed off Moore's concerns. He said the document was sanitized and redacted for security reasons. Moore didn't believe it. Obviously, the plan was to get Paul to go public with the Aquarius document. Then the government steps in to discredit him. This meant Moore was now specifically being asked to lie to a fellow UFO researcher on behalf of the US government, a man he considered a friend, and help the government destroy his friend's reputation. Moore was conflicted, so he didn't do anything, not for months. Then Doty told him, "Deliver the document or never hear from me again." So Moore did as he was told and delivered the fraudulent Project Aquarius document. But trying to protect him, he begged Paul to never speak of it. So Special Agent Doty had Paul Benowitz covered on the Kirtland Air Base side, but he still needed to address the issue of underground bases near Dulce that Paul was convinced he saw. So Doty and the OSI put props all around the area. They set up domes and air vents and even what looked like alien craft. They littered the mountain with the stuff. The OSI had helicopters painted black and flew them at locations and times where Paul was sure to see them. And Paul believed it all. When you consider all the time and trouble and expense that went into deceiving Paul Benowitz, you have to ask, who ordered this and why? Was it just to discredit one UFO guy? No. Richard Doty's actual goal was to infiltrate the UFO community and flood that community with as much disinformation as possible. Then the government could observe the results of that campaign, identify possible security risks, and if necessary, neutralize them. But all of this would eventually unravel, and the truth would be revealed. The Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, holds a convention every year. In 1989, Bill Moore was a speaker at that convention, and during his talk, he admitted that the US government had been actively spreading lies about UFOs for years, and he knew this because he was helping them to do it.
And it was Richard Doty, then with AFOSI at Kirtland Air Force Base, who soon came into play as the middleman in that process. Shortly thereafter, it became apparent to me that my supplying information to the government through Doty on the activities of Paul Benowitz, APRO, and to a lesser extent several other individuals was to be a part of this equation. I also discovered that whatever it was that Benowitz was involved with, he was the subject of considerable interest on the part of not one, but several government agencies, and that they were actively trying to defuse him by pumping as much disinformation through him as he could possibly absorb.
He was practically booed off the stage.
Frankly, I'm a little ashamed of some people in this audience, regardless of what you believe, what you hear, or not.
It was really hard for these people to learn that everything they believed regarding UFOs was a lie. And this confession ended Bill Moore's career in UFO research. Bill Moore said that he was one of several high-profile UFO personalities who had made deals with Doty, though he never revealed the names. He also said Doty was feeding disinformation to tabloids like the National Enquirer and to journalists like Linda Moulton Howe. The disinformation campaign developed by the Air Force OSI and executed by Agent Richard Doty was a success. There were now so many wild stories circulating about UFOs that it was impossible for actual earnest research to cut through the noise. Another goal of the campaign was to marginalize believers, make it so mainstream scientists and politicians and reporters would never publicly admit to believing in UFOs. The stories were too crazy. The only people publicly discussing UFOs were what you'd call fringe conspiracy nuts. This is exactly what the government wanted. But here's the thing. The key to a successful disinformation campaign is staying as close to the truth as possible. So of all the crazy UFO information that Richard Doty spread, how much of it is true? Well, according to Richard Doty himself, almost all of it.
I'm Richard Doty. I was assigned as a special agent with Air Force Office of Special Investigations at
Kirtland Air Force Base. I was a counterintelligence officer at the base, and one of my jobs was to conduct counterintelligence operations at the base. And during my time there, my first few months there, I was briefed into a special access program involving the U.S. government's investigation and contacts with extraterrestrial, the visitation of these extraterrestrials to Earth. I was read into the project in the summer of 1979. And the briefing was, it was a special access program. They have a special security clearance to have access to it. And I was briefed into it by an Air Force colonel from Washington who came down and briefed myself and a couple other people into this program. They showed us the movie. They actually showed us, I believe it was a 16 millimeter movie on the recovery. It was, obviously the movie was classified, highly classified. The narrator in the movie detailed when the crash occurred, approximately when the crash occurred in the latter part of June of 1947, and the recovery, showing military personnel at the recovery site, recovering the bodies at the site, and the craft that was at that site.
The story of Air Force OSI agent Richard Doty is a complicated one. And because he worked in military intelligence, it's not easy to find information. After the Paul Benowitz affair, he stayed in the Air Force, but left the Office of Special Investigation. He said some of his superiors saw his actions as unauthorized, so he was asked to leave, which he did voluntarily. And there's nothing in his military record to indicate he's not telling the truth. And after he left the service in 1988, his life gets confusing. He became a New Mexico state policeman, eventually retiring from that position. But something changed in him. He became a UFO believer. Doty continues to show up in interviews, in documentaries. He even goes to UFO conventions. In the early 1980s, Richard Doty did more damage to UFO research than any single person ever had. But as recently as a few years ago, he's a guest speaker at UFO conventions. He claims 80% of the information circulating about UFOs is real. He claims the Roswell crash happened. He claims the US government did recover a spacecraft, did recover alien bodies, and even had a live alien at Los Alamos for a few years. That alien, by the way, liked Tibetan music and strawberry ice cream.
Hold on. Did you just say aliens like strawberry ice cream?
Yup.
I'll take sentences I thought I'd never hear for 200, Alex.
Doty said when he was briefed into OSI, he was shown a film with clips from the late 40s and early 50s that showed all these things were true. But can we trust him?
The craft was more or less an oval or egg-shaped craft. It wasn't saucer-shaped. But the creatures were approximately 4 foot. They didn't appear to have any ears. The fingers had no thumbs, just four fingers. Suction devices on their tips of their fingers. And they found a number of different objects in the craft that they used, that they experimented with and found. They had a piece of, they thought was plexiglass. It was a rectangular piece of plexiglass that they kept for years before they figured out it was the energy device for the craft.
If you follow Richard Doty's interviews through the years, you'll notice the details aren't consistent. Now, maybe that's just a product of getting older. But what about his job history? He worked for the Air Force, specifically spreading lies about UFOs. Then he became a policeman. He talks about these things easily. But I've never seen him mention that he spent 10 years as a contractor for Hal Puthoff. I won't go into detail about Puthoff here, but for those who don't know, he's the founder of To the Stars, a private venture that investigates UFOs. Fine. Who else is on the board of To the Stars? Well, there's Christopher Mellon of the Mellon family. And when not enjoying life as a billionaire, Chris worked for the CIA and the Department of Defense. Who else? Steve Justice, former director of advanced systems development at Lockheed Martin, the infamous Skunk Works division. He's led many secret military projects, but good luck finding information on him. Then you have Luis Elizondo, a former intelligence officer who ran the secret government project ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. ATIP was essentially a continuation of Project Blue Book, a military program to investigate UFOs. The government denied ATIP's existence until the New York Times exposed it. This private company that says they are bringing UFOs mainstream sure has a lot of senior people from the American intelligence apparatus, and they hire people like Richard Doty, foot soldiers of that apparatus. Have all these people had changes of heart? They spent their entire careers executing covert operations against American citizens and spreading lies to people who simply want the truth. But that was then, they say. You can trust us now. The New York Times exposed secret government programs related to UFOs. The Navy has released footage of pilots tracking UFOs. But how much more do we really know? The government recently released an enormous amount of documents pertaining to UFOs. Congress had a public hearing about UFOs. How much more do we really know? Not much. Was Richard Doty lying then? Is he lying now? Who knows? Because of a decades-long government-sponsored disinformation campaign, a campaign that I believe is still happening, we don't know what to believe. But that was the point all along. The government has thousands of square miles of land in the middle of nowhere, but it flies secret aircraft right near Paul Bennewitz's house in Albuquerque? Paul Benowitz didn't receive any mysterious signals until after Agent Doty inspected and photographed the equipment he was using. Then suddenly the NSA shows up and beams alien messages into Paul's house? These are not coincidences. The Air Force put out irresistible bait, and Paul Benowitz, Bill Moore, and countless others swallowed it. They are victims. We all are. Victims of our own government. Our military, our law enforcement, our elected officials, all of them solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution and protect the United States of America from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. But who are they really swearing to protect? Not all of us, because that oath doesn't seem to apply to the individual American citizen. No matter how honest you are, how loyal, how patriotic, or how many years you spent serving your country, if you interfere even slightly with the government's agenda, your own government will dedicate a tremendous amount of resources to destroy your reputation, your finances, your career, and if it can, your sanity, and call it a success. Your government will take away all that you hold dear in the name of the greater good. How many lives have been sacrificed at the holy altar of protecting national security? How many victims? Isn't it time we demanded an answer? Well, don't do it, because otherwise the next victim is you.
So, Jerry, you're saying this whole pyramid scheme started because of the Y-Files. That's fascinating.
Chuck, after that Ancient Aliens episode, I realized we're all just building pyramids of ignorance, man.
Antarctica has been the source of high strangeness for a long time. Rumors of UFOs and alien bases go back to the 1930s. Hitler wanted to build bases there. Some people think he did. Operation High Jump arrived in 1946 with a heavily armed U.S. Navy fleet. Their mission was to extend American sovereignty over Antarctica. The mission was supposed to take 6 months. Instead, it lasted 6 weeks. The operation ended because of poor weather. At least that's the official report. Eyewitnesses said aggressive flying, disc-shaped craft chased the Navy out of the area. In 1985, a medevac flight was forced over a no-fly zone near the South Pole. The crew saw a giant hole in the ice, as wide as a football field. When the crew returned to base, they were debriefed, not by the Navy, by men in suits. One of the crewmen said they had the typical DC look. In the 1990s, Navy flight crews reported silver discs zipping over mountain peaks at impossible speeds. The crews were told to never speak of it. In 2003, a Navy SEAL on a covert mission found an ancient structure protruding through the ice. It was made of something that wasn't quite metal, but wasn't quite stone. It was warm to the touch, and on that structure was a door. In 2018, scientists in Antarctica launched weather balloons to study cosmic rays coming from space and hitting the Earth. They found cosmic rays, as expected. But what they didn't expect, the cosmic rays were coming from something 2 miles underneath the ice. There are witnesses who have seen things, heard things, and felt things that should not exist in Antarctica, yet they do. Whatever's down there, we're not supposed to know about it. But one thing's for sure, something very strange and very important is happening at the bottom of the world. In November 1995, a Navy flight engineer who wishes to be known as Brian was part of a U.S. Navy C-130 crew. The plane flew low circles around Marie Birdland. This was an area in the southwest part of Antarctica where 15 scientists set up camp. The plane was dispatched from McMurdo Base, a few hundred miles east of camp. The protocol is for scientists to radio every day and report their status. McMurdo hadn't heard from the science team in a couple of days. That was bad. The scientists were from the National Science Foundation, and their mission was routine: study weather conditions, take ice samples, note wildlife, that sort of thing. They had no reason to wander away from camp. Even if they did, they'd be dead within an hour anyway. The C-130 flew in tighter and tighter circles. The crew could easily see the camp. The weather was clear and visibility was good. They could see the huts, fuel tanks, some equipment. Snowmobiles were lined up. Everything seemed to be in order. A C-130 Hercules is a 4-engine turboprop. It's big. It's loud. If there was a problem, this is the point where people should be popping out of huts and waving their arms, but nothing. The rescue crew landed and took a look around. 15 scientists were dropped off here about a week ago. They had enough supplies to last a month, but nobody's here. There's no tracks, no signs of anything. The crew checked the radio. It was working fine. They radio their commanding officer at McMurdo.
There were no people, no bodies, no signs of a struggle. It's like they just vanished. What do we do?
The orders came back. They were obvious. There's really nothing you can do. Fly one last search pattern and return to base. So the C-130 made a few wider circles to see if there's any sign of the science team. There was nothing. After an hour or so, they flew back to McMurdo. The missing scientists were a mystery, but Antarctica is a dangerous place. People do die there from time to time. Anything could have happened. But over a week later, the C-130 crew gets an urgent command. Immediately return to the Marie Birdland camp. The scientists somehow are back. They just radioed in and they were in a panic. They want to get out of there, and they want to get out right now. Antarctica is one of Earth's most isolated and unexplored places. Over 98% is buried beneath ice sheets that are 2 and sometimes even 3 miles thick. Despite extreme weather and limited access, discoveries are being made in Antarctica that hint at extraterrestrial activity, advanced technology, and lost civilizations hidden under the miles of ice. Recent satellite images reveal several pyramid and pyramid-like structures poking through the icy landscape. The official explanation is that these are natural rock formations, but there's one pyramid built with precise geometry, with each side lining up perfectly with true north, south, east, and west. Something like this wouldn't occur in nature. This looks like intelligent design. One enormous 1.2-mile-wide pyramid was found, and it could be the oldest on Earth, suggesting all others were styled after it. Is this another hint that an ancient race built these monuments to generate energy? And this takes us back to the story of Tesla, trying to create free, unlimited wireless energy with his Wardenclyffe Tower experiments. He attempted to use technology that may have been used in the Great Pyramid of Giza long ago.
Tesla pyramid link below, human.
According to the Knights Templar, the true purpose of each pyramid is to store an ark, just like the Ark of the Covenant. They claim there were 10 of these arcs scattered around the world that, when connected, generated unlimited energy for everyone on Earth.
Knights Templar link below.
90 million years ago, Antarctica was a rainforest. We have core samples to prove it. That's not controversial. Geologists claim Antarctica has been frozen and uninhabited for over 12 million years. So who's building pyramids beneath hundreds or thousands of feet of ice? Well, nobody. But what if Antarctica had a warmer climate more recently than 12 million years ago? much more recently. The Pinkerton map, drawn in 1818, was the most accurate in the world. Well, almost. If you look at the southern hemisphere on the Pinkerton map, nothing exists, just open sea. Now, that makes sense. Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. It wasn't confirmed to be a landmass until 1840. But older maps show Antarctica not as a giant frozen continent, but as a land free of ice, a land where plants and animals lived. And these maps go back to the 1500s. In 1513, the Piri Reis map was compiled.
Pee-wee Reese?
Piri Reis.
What'd I say?
The Piri Reis map shows the coastline of Antarctica and the animals living there. The Orontius Phineas map is dated 1531. The entire continent of Antarctica is there, and there's no indication of ice at all. It shows mountain ranges that we know are there. The Piri Reis map only shows the coastline of Antarctica, but the Orontius map shows interior features of the continent. And now, because of satellite imagery, we know those features are there. They're just covered under miles of ice. If you sailed to Antarctica during the 1500s when these two maps were drawn, you'd find exactly what you'd find now. Nothing, a frozen wasteland. But that's not what the maps show. Why? Because these maps are based on much older maps. But how old is the big question? And it's a question that mainstream scientists don't want to answer. Because the last time parts of the coast of Antarctica were free of ice was at least 6,000 years ago. The human race was not supposed to be sailing the globe back then. But the Orontius Phineas map shows the entire continent free of ice. How could this be? Because it's based on a map that was drawn not 6,000 years ago, but 12,000 years ago. And the reason Antarctica wasn't covered in ice? Well, it wasn't at the South Pole. Charles Hapgood was a Harvard-educated historian and explorer. His radical theories about Earth's geologic history made him famous and controversial. Hapgood believed that Antarctica had a temperate climate not too long ago, and living there was an advanced ancient civilization.
Atlantis?
Don't get ahead of me.
Sorry. I'm excited. Go ahead.
So there's a civilization living on Antarctica, but it's not at the South Pole. At least most of it isn't. Remember, Antarctica is a huge continent. There's plenty of land for a civilization to exist, as long as the continent's not too far south, which it wasn't. But suddenly, a crustal displacement violently relocated Antarctica into frigid polar latitudes 12,000 years ago. Hapgood believed evidence indicated that portions of the planet's surface could shift dramatically along the molten inner layers. This could conceivably transform entire continents virtually overnight. Hapgood also used the Orontius Phineas map to help support his theory. Not only is Antarctica free of ice, it's not in the right place. Antarctica has shifted 1,000 miles away from the South Pole. That's a polar shift of 7.5 degrees. Hapgood said the shift could have happened in less than a week, maybe even in a single day. If Hapgood's theory is correct, the destruction would have been catastrophic. If Antarctica suddenly traveled 1,000 miles toward the South Pole, any civilization would be destroyed, and the layers of ice would start building immediately. The crust floats on the mantle, and tectonic plates are always in motion. They move away from each other, they collide with each other, but this process takes millions of years. What could possibly cause the Earth's pole to shift 7.5 degrees in a single day? Well, in 1974, Italian naval engineer Flavio Barbiero published A Civilization Under the Ice. He proposed that the remains of a lost civilization may lie under the ice of Antarctica. He says that Antarctica had a temperate climate home to a thriving civilization. Then the entire continent was suddenly thrown to the South Pole due to a major impact event.
Younger Dryas, here we come.
Yeah, it seems like every episode of the Y-Files ends up here. If there was a giant asteroid impact between 12 and 13,000 years ago, it could have caused a shift in the Earth's crust. We know something about 12,800 years ago suddenly caused the Earth to warm. That warming melted the Earth's ice sheets, and sea levels rose hundreds of feet. What if another result of this impact was a shifting in the Earth's poles of 7.5 degrees? Then suddenly the Orontius-Phineas map makes perfect sense. But that leaves the biggest question of all.
Yeah, but who drew the map?
Right. Clearly, whatever civilization drew the map was highly advanced. The Orontius map shows features that you could really only see from the air.
Atlantis! This is the story of Atlantis!
All of this does fit nicely with the story of Atlantis. The island nation, the advanced people, the sudden cataclysm. Every chronological event lines up perfectly. So what happened to the civilization when miles of ice started piling on top of their cities? Where did they go? Well, they didn't go anywhere. They're still down there. Brian's C-130 rescue team mobilized out of McMurdo Base and was on the ground at Marie Birdland Base in less than 2 hours. When the plane landed, the crew saw that the scientists had haphazardly packed all their gear on pallets and were eager to get the hell out of there. The science team boarded the aircraft in absolute silence. The crew asked them what was wrong. Are they okay? Is there anything they could do to help? The scientists just stared in silence, almost catatonic. They were clearly in shock. The crew offered them food and hot coffee. Silence. From wheels up to wheels down is 2 hours, and nobody uttered a word. When the C-130 landed at McMurdo, the scientists were told they were going on another plane. For some reason, they didn't want to move, or couldn't. Someone had to go into the plane, physically unbuckle and remove each scientist from their seat. These people clearly saw something and were suffering from PTSD. They walked like zombies to the other plane, and they were gone. Their research gear was placed in an empty storage facility and locked. The rescue crew was told not to go in there. The equipment was quarantined. The gear would stay locked and guarded until transported to a different location. Nobody knew it then, but that gear would eventually be taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. If you know your UFO lore, you know that one of the places recovered craft go is Wright-Patterson. Wright-Patterson was also the headquarters of Project Blue Book, the Air Force UFO Investigation Unit. Anyway, the C-130 rescue crew was called into the commander's office. Inside the office were 2 men in plain clothes who had just arrived from Washington, D.C.
Men in black.
Yep. They told the crew that they would never speak of this incident. Not the missing scientists, not the equipment, not the location of their camp, nothing. None of this ever happened. The crew flight engineer, Brian, was fine with this. This wasn't his first keep your mouth shut meeting. He had this very same meeting in this very same room about 10 years earlier. But that first meeting wasn't about people and equipment on the ground. It was a meeting about what Brian saw in the sky. In 2003, a Navy SEAL team was dispatched from McMurdo Base to the Beardmore Glacier region. Officially, they were doing routine reconnaissance. Unofficially, it was an extraction operation. The team was to find a scientist, gather his research, and return him to base. The SEAL team commander was codenamed Spartan 1. It was made very clear to him and his team that the research was extremely important and had to be protected at all costs. Now, of course, Spartan 1 agreed, but this was an odd request. As far as they knew, this researcher was just some scientist taking pictures of a glacier. And that was true, but it was much more than that. As the SEAL team approached their destination, they saw the top of a black octagon. It was protruding about 18 feet above the melting ice and snow. Spartan 1 approached and saw a huge door. It was 23 feet high and had markings that he thought looked like a star map. Also engraved in the door was a triangle with 2 lines crossing through the center. This is a symbol that's popped up in various places around the world throughout history. Journalist Linda Moulton Howe, who interviewed Spartan 1 and other witnesses, showed him the picture of a coin found in Mexico City in 1993. It had the same markings.
Have you ever seen anything like that?
That was on the outside of the door of the structure, the top right-hand corner of the door.
Spartan 1 gently pushed on the door. It was over 20 feet tall and 18 feet thick. It opened easily. It was perfectly balanced. The SEAL team entered the building. The external temperature was 40 degrees below zero. Inside the building, the temperature varied between 68 and 72 degrees. The door gently closed behind them, leaving the team in eerie silence. And the room was huge. It covered 9 acres, almost 400,000 square feet. The room was as long as 7 football fields. It took Spartan 1 and his team quite a while to walk the length of the hallway. The walls were generating a soft lime green light, though they couldn't see how. It was as if the light was coming from the walls themselves. And on the walls were rows and rows of carved characters. Spartan 1 said they reminded him of Egyptian hieroglyphics or Mayan glyphs, but they definitely weren't either. The SEAL team found their scientists taking pictures and samples of the structure. They asked him how big this place was. He pointed to a ramp at the end of the room. The ramp extended down into the rest of the building. He said in total it covered 62 acres. That's over 2.7 million square feet. It was huge and mostly under the ice, and this was only one of several structures in the area. Now this was 2003. At this time, this giant door was the only way into the structure. But in the years since, other entrances have been found. But the only way to access them is by submarine. Subs have been going 2 miles under the ice to enter the structures. And unlike that top room, the facility's lower levels are occupied. And they're not occupied by humans. Brian's odd rescue mission of the disappearing scientists wasn't his first experience with Antarctica's high strangeness. In the early 1980s, his C-130 crew flew lots of missions over Antarctica. These were usually trips to resupply research stations and transport cargo and personnel, mostly routine stuff. He called them milk runs. Then one mission changed everything. Brian received word his crew was to prepare for the emergency transport of an injured scientist at Davis Station on the opposite side of Antarctica. After taking on additional medical staff at McMurdo Station, they set course for the Trans-Antarctic Mountains. Approaching the South Pole, Brian noticed his navigator plotting an unusual course. He was heading straight over a remote camp labeled Air Sampling Station. It was a no-fly zone, so off-limits to planes. But with a life on the line, the crew violated the no-fly zone. As the plane gained altitude, Brian saw something he would never forget.
Left of center line.
All right, we'll head 183.
183. Good correction, you were right on center line. Engineer has the lead-in plan.
There was a 300-foot wide hole carved in the ice. There were tracks all over the area and tracks extending down inside the hole. There was clearly a lot of activity around this air sampling station. Brian and his crew didn't understand why there was so much secrecy over an ice hole in the middle of nowhere.
You stay away from that asparaging ice hole, you asparaging a sneaky bastard. Johnny Dangerously?
Yeah, I got it. After delivering their patients safely to McMurdo, the crew was summoned to the commander's office.
I was summoned to the commander's office once, human. Once.
Enough with the Johnny Dangerously references, okay? In the room was an officer they'd never seen before. Also present were 2 men dressed in suits.
Men in black.
Yep.
Again.
Yep. The new officer asked about the decision to violate the no-fly zone. The crew explained they had no choice. The patient would have died if they had to fly all the way around. Then the officer just started slowly pacing back and forth, thinking to himself. Finally, he looked at the men in suits, who stepped forward. They said, "Okay, gentlemen, what you saw, you did not see. You were not over that area. You will never go over that area. You will never ever talk about this ever again. Understood?" The crew agreed. Brian's been retired from the Navy for a few years, and even though he's never signed a non-disclosure agreement, he's still not comfortable giving his full name.
Smart.
He was with the Navy for years and flew hundreds of missions in Antarctica. He saw silver UFOs on many occasions, as did other flight crews. It was such a common occurrence that it became routine banter at the mess hall. Brian didn't think much of the incident until a few months later. He was assigned to fly a group of scientists to the dome at the South Pole. The dome was decommissioned in 2010, but at the time there were other buildings inside the dome. Obviously offices and labs, but there was also a galley. Brian was in the galley one day and overheard some civilians talking about the infamous air sampling station. You know, the one in the no-fly zone with the
Vatican ice hole.
A giant hole in the ice, yes. The civilians were saying that they were going back out there to meet some visitors. Brian heard other crews saying similar things. They were taking people to the hole at the South Pole to talk with visitors. Finally, Brian asked what they meant by visitors.
"What do you mean by visitors?" And he said, "Well, my impression was that they weren't human." I said, "Human?" You know, I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "It seemed to me they were talking about like an extraterrestrial or an alien, because they didn't refer to them as a person, it was a visitor."
The rumors had been circulating for years. That 300-foot hole in the ice is an entrance to a base where humans and aliens are cooperating on some type of project. What the project is or was, we don't know. This was the 1990s. But now we have Google Earth. The military is doing their best to cover up their activity in Antarctica, but there are some photographs that they just can't explain. In 2007, a very suspicious image appeared on Google Earth. It's a cave entrance that seems to have stairs leading to it. The ground around the entrance is discolored, as if machinery or equipment was moving in and out. The opening is about 250 feet wide. A few months after the image was released, it disappeared from Google Earth. Then sometime around 2019 or 2020, the cave entrance reappeared. But this time it doesn't look much like an entrance. In fact, even though this photo is 10 years newer, the resolution is worse. We see better detail in the older image. That's suspicious and feels like a cover-up. And speaking of cover-ups, a very interesting story appeared in the Free Republic News on April 13th, 2002. The headline read, "U.S. denies spectacular ruins in Antarctica captured on video."
What?
Well, here's what happened. A TV crew for a production company called Atlantis TV went to Antarctica. They were investigating a massive archaeological dig rumored to be happening 2 miles beneath the ice. Well, the crew disappeared.
Yeah, I saw that coming.
But Navy rescuers found their camp and some of their equipment. Among the items found was a videotape. 2 Navy officers showed the footage to scientists when they returned to McMurdo Base. What they saw on the tape was, now here's the quote, "They said it showed spectacular ruins and other things they couldn't go into." A secret U.S. military expedition apparently discovered an ancient pyramid temple complex 2 miles beneath the ice. So pyramids are showing up again. By the way, the U.S. military blocked the tape from being released. Atlantis TV sued to get their property back. They didn't win. As far as I can tell, they went out of business a few years ago. Other odd images have been spotted on Google Earth, like this one of what appears to be an alien face.
That's like the face on Mars.
It reminds me of that too. Then there's this photo of what looks like a spaceship that crash landed. People have mentioned the shape of it looks similar to Oumuamua.
Muahua?
Oumuamua was first spotted in October 2017. It's the first known interstellar object to pass through our solar system. Its name means scout or messenger in Hawaiian. What made Oumuamua strange were its shape and the way it moved. It was about 400 feet long and 60 feet wide. This cigar-like shape is unlike any other space object we've ever seen. And somehow when Oumuamua left our solar system, it accelerated. This shouldn't have happened. There are rumors that a secret mission went to Oumuamua and said it was a derelict spacecraft. If that's true, then it could be a probe, one of many flying around our galaxy, perhaps from an alien race looking for planets with life.
Or planets to conquer.
Well, there's always that risk. Aliens will discover our planet rich in resources and want it for themselves. But according to witnesses, documents, and images of Antarctica, the aliens are already here, and they have been for a very, very long time. There are so many stories, rumors, and legends about Antarctica that it's impossible to cover them all in one video. If you want me to go into detail on any of today's stories or any others, let me know. There's a lot of material out there. Now today we focused on the Younger Dryas impact theory, which moved Antarctica to a different position. We covered the caves and a few photo anomalies. We talked about the Navy SEAL who actually entered an alien facility, and we talked about Brian, the Navy pilot, who saw UFOs and
the giant Fargan ice hole.
Right, the 300-foot wide hole in the ice. Fine. What's true and what isn't? Well, Brian's story is tricky. There is no photograph that we know of that hole in the ice. As far as I can find, there are no other whistleblowers. Whoever the missing scientists were, they're not talking. Now, Brian sounds sincere, but still, I'd take his story with a grain of salt. But Brian's reports of UFOs zipping around Antarctica are confirmed by multiple witnesses. UFOs are down there, I have no doubt about that. But the photos of the pyramids are also tricky. Some look like nothing more than pointy rocks, but there are a few that definitely look man-made.
Or alien-made.
Right. Now, I'd be interested to know if they have 8 sides like the Pyramid of Giza, but I couldn't tell from the photographs. The face, I'm convinced that's just pareidolia. Pareidolia is when our brains see objects in random patterns, but I have to admit that definitely looks like an alien face. I don't think it is, but I'd love to be wrong. Now, according to mainstream science, the crash-landed spaceship is a boulder that rolled down a hill, or a piece of ice or rock that slid down a hill. Now, at first, this sounds ridiculous, but we rarely see the full image. In the full image, like this one from Forbes, you can actually see the outcropping where the boulder came from, so this one's probably debunked. Next, the Navy SEAL who found and entered the alien structure. Again, he's the only one telling the story. He won't give his name or what SEAL team he's with. So again, all we have to go on is his word. Now, by the way, a lot of today's information comes from a documentary by Linda Moulton Howe. It's called Antarctica: Alien Secrets Beneath the Ice. You can rent it on Amazon for $4, and it's worth every penny. In the documentary, the whistleblowers go into much more detail. They make sketches about what they saw. They talk about the stargates all over the planet that can take you someplace instantly. Some stargates can take you to other planets instantly. Anyway, I link to her doc below. Now, as you know, I'm normally very skeptical of stories where we only have one witness. But Antarctica is a strange place, and I'm sure things are happening down there that are being hidden from the public. Now, the only way to access Antarctica is with permission from one of 12 government signatories of the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959. This treaty divides the continent into zones administered by the various governments. It's a continent larger than the United States, and you're not allowed to go there. Now, there will be people in the comments saying, of course you can go there. You can take cruises there. You can even arrange to stay at one of the outposts. All that's true. But these are designated areas. Let's say you had the resources to fly a plane to where the hole is supposed to be. You can't. Thousands of square miles around it is a no-fly zone. You cannot explore Antarctica on your own. Now, the official reason for this is that human activity would disrupt the ecosystem. Now, that's a convenient excuse. Most of the surface is dead. There is no ecosystem. Besides, I don't care about the surface. I want to know what's underneath the ice. They're not going to tell us. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in December 1959 at the height of the Cold War, and it's never been broken. Now, I've heard that World War III will not come from a conflict near Russia or from something happening in the Middle East. World War III will occur when someone breaks the Antarctic Treaty. And if any of these whistleblowers are telling the truth, the United States already has broken the treaty. They claim major archaeological projects are underway right now miles below the ice. But maybe the treaty hasn't been broken. Maybe all the governments are working together to uncover something. Or they're working with, as Brian claims, several species of aliens right now. Now, could there be ancient civilizations buried under the ice, frozen in time like the city of Pompeii? Sure, but until we're allowed to dig, we'll never know. But could there be an active civilization beneath the ice? Scientifically speaking, absolutely there could. Antarctica is the most volcanically active place on Earth. Geothermal heat could provide fresh water and a very comfortable climate for life, intelligent life. And not in small pockets. There are caverns beneath the ice that are said to be larger than Manhattan Island. Now, we'll never know until we're allowed to dig, which we'll never be allowed to do. But here's a small wrinkle: global warming.
Here we go again with the global warming myth.
It's not a myth. The Earth is warming. Whether it's because of human activity or just part of the Earth's natural cycle, we don't know, but the Earth is warming.
How dare you!
So whether by pollution, an asteroid impact, or a massive solar event, there is a chance the Earth could warm quickly, like during the Younger Dryas. Then Antarctica would be free of ice, as it once was. Then the entire Earth would experience another cataclysmic flood. And if there is a civilization beneath Antarctica, it would be revealed. Now, if this global disaster happens, I guess there is a bright side. Civilization will continue. It just won't be ours.
Plans for tonight?
Blorpus and chill.
At the height of the space race in the late 1970s, the Viking probes successfully landed on Mars, collecting pictures, data, and samples from the Red Planet. It was so successful that Soviet scientists wanted their shot at glory. But their focus wasn't on Mars. It was on its moon, Phobos, named after the Greek god of fear. After all, if NASA could land on Mars, landing on one of its moons should be easy, right? Well, it turns out Mars's largest moon was right to be named after the Greek god of fear. Because as barren as the landscape looks, as impossible as it is to live there, something does. And that something does not want to be seen. Scientists and astronomers have long debated the potential for life on Mars. When the first probes landed on the surface, the outlook for finding life wasn't good. The landscape was barren, the atmosphere a reddish-green haze. This did not look like a planet that could support even the simplest life forms. However, after further study, opinions have changed. As I've shown on this channel, NASA has been taking some creative license with their photography.
Link below to the video about Mars and the NASA cover-up.
Right. The Martian atmosphere is actually bluish-gray, not green or red. And the surface of Mars used to be a lot like Earth, covered in vast oceans of water, liquid water, just like Earth. As you know, the Earth has a spinning iron-nickel core that creates a magnetic field. This field protects us from solar wind and radiation. Well, billions of years ago, Mars had a similar core, which gave it similar protection. But eventually the Martian core stopped spinning, and without the protection of its magnetic field, solar wind stripped away most of the Martian atmosphere. The reason there's water on Earth is because our atmosphere is actually pretty heavy. When Mars lost its atmospheric pressure, its water evaporated into space. Well, most of its water. There's still water frozen in the Martian ice caps. Scientists have even discovered organic compounds in Martian rocks, compounds that are the building blocks of life. So, if there are signs of life on Mars, what about its moons? Could there be life there too? Well, Mars has 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, both named after the sons of the Greek god Ares. American astronomer Asaph Hall discovered them in 1877. Now, Phobos is the larger and closer of the 2 moons, but large in this case is misleading. It's only about 14 miles across. For comparison, our moon is 2,000 miles wide. Phobos is also oddly close to Mars, only about 5,000 miles away. Our moon is 200,000 miles away. Phobos